When blokes get together for a drink in a pub, they can often be fancy with the facts, like the hole-in-one they scored last Sunday, or the big one that got away that morning. It's brushed off as a bit of manly bravado. But what if the tale was one of multiple murder?
When firefighters first arrived, they found a large volume of smoke coming out of this building. They found that the front door was closed and locked, so they kicked it open. As they went in, they searched through different rooms to see if they could find any people that might be trapped. One of them went into a room which was like a lounge room, and he found a woman sitting on a lounge in that room. There was no fire in the room, but she appeared to him to be deceased. The other firefighter who went down towards the back of the building, when he got to the end of the hallway, he found a large room which was an office, which was totally involved in fire. And as he stepped into that room, he found the body of a woman laying on the floor. And he believed that there was a possibility that this woman may still be alive. So he dragged the body halfway up the hallway, and it was only at that stage that he saw that she had some horrific injuries and that she was dead. So they both went back down the hallway to make sure the fire didn't spread anywhere in the building.
After a 000 emergency call, fire crews arrived at Kerry's relaxation centre to find a blaze in a back room. As they put out the flames, a grim discovery.
Inside the building were 2 fatalities. The fire was quickly extinguished, and the cause of the fatalities and the cause of the fire is under investigation.
The premises were called Kerry's Oasis, and it was advertised as being a reflexology health spa, which I think are probably fancy words for a massage parlour.
The 2 victims inside and the crime scene evidence surrounding them were giving police a strong indication of what had taken place.
Victim 1 in the front room appeared not to have struggled at all, and in fact I would go so far as to say that that particular victim didn't even see it coming.
She had a gunshot wound in the right cheek and a gunshot wound in the right neck, and there was a gunshot wound in the right temple that showed a muzzle abrasion, which indicates that the gun was held in contact with the skin when it was fired.
The fact that she was sitting in a natural sitting position on the couch and looking at the way the blood had run down the front of the body would strongly suggest that either she had been talking to the offender when she was shot and wasn't expecting anything to happen, or the offender walked straight into the room, shot her and then walked straight out again.
That person has then possibly gone out of that front room and had an altercation with victim number 2 and discharged a further 3 shots in the vicinity of the hallway towards the reception room. Inside the reception area, 2 walls had sustained bullet impact damage, and a humidifier had also been completely penetrated by what appeared to be a bullet.
We also found some groceries. We found a can of baked beans that had a dent in it. We found some newspaper that had blood on it. It was reasonably obvious that there'd been some sort of gun battle or event had taken place in that room. Down the hallway, there was an amount of blood smearing up on both sides of the hallway. There was a water cooler which had been knocked over, which once again suggests that a struggle occurred in that hallway.
While her body had been dragged by firefighters into the hallway, victim number 2 had made it to the far room. A pool of blood remained at the place she died.
There were some obvious cuts on the face and neck. There was quite a lot of damage to the face, which usually indicates somebody who's got a fair degree of dislike for the person. She also had a gunshot wound in the right eye, and I think it was probably the finishing shot. So both of the victims had been finished off with fairly close-range gunshot wounds. It looks like an execution.
one of the victims was discovered near the office. She'd been stabbed, her throat slashed. Police believe she's the 40-year-old manageress. Her 52-year-old de facto husband collapsed in shock after being told she was dead.
It was explained to him that he couldn't go in because it was a crime scene, and firefighters grabbed hold of him to stop him from going in there, and at that point he collapsed onto the street, and we immediately called for an ambulance to come and tend to him.
As he was taken to hospital, detectives looked at his car that had been abandoned on the street.
And when you opened the sliding door of the white Tarago, there was what appeared to be a lever-action rifle and a gun case immediately inside the door. The case was partially opened and blood was seen on the lining of the case and also the case itself. Obviously, a firearm so close to a double murder is highly suspicious, especially when there's blood on the gun case. Clearly, he knew the people that were in the house, and as a matter of course, we had to speak to him.
Post-mortems have confirmed that 2 murdered women were the victims of a frenzied attack in a Sydney massage parlour.
The killer set out to destroy as much evidence as he could, but the flames did not spread quickly enough to hide the secrets of his horrific crime. A post-mortem has still managed to reveal that 40-year-old Kerry Pang and Fatima Ozanal, 26, were brutally murdered.
Pang had been stabbed numerous times, her throat had been cut, and she had sustained a gunshot wound. Ozanal had been shot a number of times.
Kerry and her employee Fatima, also known as Nikki, had been shot by a .22 firearm. So when detectives discovered a gun matching the description in the boot of Kerry's de facto's car, they needed to speak with him. Mark Lewis had been released from hospital after being treated for shock.
You're aware now, aren't you, that Kerry and the other girl, Nikki, were murdered?
You told me they were shot, yes.
Do you have any knowledge about that at all?
No.
Would you care to tell me what your movements were this afternoon after 5 p.m?
As I mentioned to you before, I started watching news at 5 o'clock. It was a 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock news. And probably 10 past, 5, the phone went, so I turned the TV down. I picked it up and just my normal mind, and I said, VIP, can I help you?
In the interview, Mr. Lewis told us that he'd received a death threat for Kerry at his premises at West Ryde. He was also operating a massage parlour in West Ryde, which is a neighbouring suburb to Gladesville.
And the male voice said to the words to the effect, I'm going to kill your girlfriend. She doesn't deserve to live. Something to that effect. And then went to receiver. And I said, oh, prickhead, you know. Just a crank call, so I put it down. And I sat back. I went to put the TV back on. I felt funny in the stomach. It bothered me when normally crank calls don't bother me. And it was the voice. And it put it like a sort of a chill down my back. I just didn't feel right.
Mr. Lewis, have you received any other similar phone calls to the one you received yesterday afternoon?
In the last 12 months, by phone, some are male, some are females. Some people think I'm a bastard, some people Kerry's a bitch, some people think, we're nasty people. You probably do too, but, we're usually just normal people trying to make money to pay the bills and keep ahead, that's all.
After receiving this threat, he told us he called Kerry, and then she left the place at Gladesville, came to West Ryde and spoke to him about it.
And I said, babe, I threatened you, I told her what was said, and she said, I haven't hurt anybody, I don't know anybody who, because over the years we have lots of problems with girls and husbands and all that, but nothing major. So she said, oh, well, I'll ring up Dick Gillespie. And she rang Ryde detectives, because she had Dick's number with her. And they said, he's not here, he's a chat to. And she said, he's not there, but I've left a message on his answer phone.
And then Mark has accompanied her back to her premises at Gladesville.
I drove down the Gladesville, and just as you come down the Gladesville one, Pitwater Road, I think there's a little shop there. The place stopped and went in the shop, and she walked around and she got a loaf of bread, and she picked up a couple of tins of something, She got in her car, I got in my car, we drove around the corner, parked in the car park. We walked to the Gladesville door.
Kissed her goodnight, according to him, and he'd returned to the premises at West Ryde.
Do you recall what time that was that you knocked at the door and left?
A phone call came probably about 5:15. She was probably up there at 5:30, 5:45, something like that. So we'd have been down there at 6, 5:15.
And then returned to his parlour at West Ryde, arriving about 7 p.m. We also spoke to him about the rifle that had been found in his Tarago.
Would you explain to me or describe to me that firearm?
It's a Winchester 22.
Mr. Lewis told us that when he was dropping Kerry off at the massage parlour, Kerry had wished to take the firearm that was in the back of the Tarago with her for self-defence.
I said, no, you don't really want to rock. And that was it, so I just left it in the car, threw it on the floor and back again.
Could you tell me how many .22 caliber rifles you owned?
I couldn't really, though. It's probably 3 or 4 or 5. I'm not 100% certain.
Yeah.
Ballistics expert Ray Grimmer had looked at the 8 cartridges and 4 intact bullets collected from the crime scene. Under the microscope, he determined that they were all discharged from one firearm. Now he was testing all of Mark Lewis's guns, 8 in total, to see if one of them was the murder weapon.
Each weapon is test fired on 3 occasions.
Firing!
So that we could recover 3 fired bullets and 3 fired cartridge cases. And this is done in a water recovery tank within our section. Once the fired cartridge cases and the fired bullets are recovered, I then compare the surfaces of those bullets and fire cases to the surfaces of the exhibit fire cases and fired bullets from the crime scene. As a result of this, I was able to eliminate those 8 firearms as being responsible for the incident that occurred at Gladesville.
With the guns eliminated, police turned to the death threat. The crime scene and autopsy had suggested that Kerry was the likely target. And it appears she took the death threat mentioned by her de facto seriously enough to call the police.
Hi, could I have Vic Ledford call me urgently? 018 257 657. It's Kerry Pang. Thank you.
She got one bloke that has been coming backwards and forwards now for about 6 months. We call him Fred Flintstone because he's got a square head. He used to be one of our customers at Parramatta. He roughed up one of our girls at one stage. He is notorious. He rings Kerry and me 3 or 4 times a week. Who's on there? Disguises his voice. You know, and all this sort of shit. Right. And we got a problem last week with a girl when she was leaving, and she threatened Kerry and myself.
When police tracked down and spoke with disgruntled clients and employees, all had alibis. But it was Mark Lewis's whereabouts they were now interested in. The phone call to the detective had brought up a discrepancy in Lewis's story, one that put him back in the spotlight.
Mr. Lewis's times were about an hour out from those that he'd been giving us, which put him in the vicinity of the murders.
8 guns belonging to Mark Lewis had been eliminated as the murder weapon involved in the death of his de facto Kerry and her employee. But 57-year-old Lewis was still firmly in the police sights.
Would you care to tell me firstly about your relationship with Kerry Pang?
Kerry and I lived together in a de facto relationship. We've had a de facto relationship now on and off for 4 years, 3 to 4 years. I broke up my marriage 3.5 years ago after 32 years, and during the last 3.5 years we spent 99% of that time together. I think a week here and a week there we might have been apart, and even when we were living apart we're still sleeping in the same bed, going to each other's house.
We spoke to a lot of friends and associates of both people. There were suggestions of infidelity on the part of Kerry. There were suggestions of a fairly insane jealousy on the part of Mark Lewis. There certainly were financial problems between them. There were professional problems between them. So the relationship wasn't as smooth and as loving as Mr. Lewis described in his interview.
With that knowledge, police began to scrutinise his version of events.
Do you recall what time that was that you dropped her at the door and left?
The phone call came probably about 5:15. She was probably up there about 5:30, 5:45, something like that. So we'd have been down there at 6, 5:15.
It was true Kerry had gone to her de facto's massage parlour at West Ryde, and she had made a call to the police.
Hi, could I have Dick Ledford call me urgently? It's Kerry Pang. Thank you.
But telephone records and one of Mark Lewis's employees put her there at 6:45 p.m, not 5:45 p.m, as Lewis had claimed.
I had not butterflies in my stomach, but I felt funny in the stomach. She said, well, how about we take Chris back to Gladesville and we'll close West Ryde? I said, yeah, that's a good idea.
Chris, who was Mark Lewis's worker, decided to stay. She told the police that the two left at 7 p.m. in separate cars, and that Kerry had called her just before she reached the massage parlour. Phone records confirming it was 7:18 p.m.
Do you recall what time that was that you dropped her at the door and left?
So we'd have been down there at 6, 5:15.
Only 12 minutes later, the firefighters were called. Kerry and her employee were already dead. Now, in Lewis's account, by 7:30 p.m, he had already been back at his business for half an hour.
After you left Gladesville, where did you go?
Back to the restaurant.
And what time approximately do you think that you arrived back there?
As I said, it would have been from the news. It would have been about,
About 7.
Could have been 10 minutes either way.
The woman working at the West Ryde massage parlour with Lewis on the night told us that he'd returned about 8 p.m. from Kerry's place. It indicated that Mr. Lewis's times were about an hour out from those that he'd been giving us, which put him in the vicinity of the murders, pretty close to the time that they may have occurred.
Then there was the rifle bag and Mark Lewis's clothes that were removed for evidence on the night of the murder.
On the shirt and the shorts and the shoes, I found very small areas of staining, which a preliminary test then tested positive for blood. I also tested the rifle bag, and on a number of areas on the outside of the rifle bag, there were very small stains, and inside there were also small stains which could have been blood. So the samples were sent for DNA testing, and the DNA profile from Mark Lewis's shorts matched Kerry, and the profile recovered from the outside of the rifle bag also matched Kerry. But on his shirt there was a mixture of DNA, which indicated to us that there was DNA from more than one individual, most likely 2 people.
One was Kerry's, the other was unknown. It could have been Mark Lewis's. It may have belonged to someone else.
We had to remember, of course, that Kerry was Mr. Lewis's partner. She travelled regularly in the vehicle and obviously regularly had close contact with him. So evidence of her blood on his clothing in the amounts that it was there were not suggestive by themselves that he was involved directly in the murder. Certainly something didn't smell right about him, but there wasn't enough to go around accusing him of a murder at that stage.
Can you tell me what your association, both past and present, with Lindsay Rose has been?
Then, 2 years later, a breakthrough.
Well, I've known Lindsay for about 10 years now. I just met him initially just as a drinking companion.
Here you go, mate.
We had an informant that we trusted, that we were confident was giving us reliable information. And he told us that he was speaking to Lindsay Rose, and Lindsay Rose had told him that he had committed a number of murders.
When police put Lindsay Rose's name through their computer, they discovered the 41-year-old had only some minor criminal charges. Yet here he was in a pub, bragging about having committed a double murder on Valentine's Day.
Lindsay Rose was saying that the husband of the woman that actually owned the parlour had paid him $20,000 to do a professional hit on her and made sure she was killed.
But as police were to find out, Lindsay Rose had only just begun to tell his story. Task Force Yandy had been set up to re-examine a number of unsolved murders in New South Wales. As a result of their investigations, they were given a lead for one cold case. An informant told detectives that the Valentine's Day murders were the result of a professional hit. Mark Lewis had apparently hired Lindsay Rose to kill his de facto wife.
Now, it turns out that Lindsay Rose and Mark Lewis were quite good friends. They had had a working relationship and a friendship over many years. Mark Lewis had a number of companies and Lindsay Rose worked for Mark Lewis on repossessions and security.
With that link established, police approached Mark Lewis.
He refused to be interviewed, would not answer any questions.
So if police wanted to prove Mark Lewis had ordered the hit, then they needed to put Lindsay Rose at the crime scene. The physical evidence that had been preserved was re-examined, starting with Mark Lewis's shirt that had the DNA mixture upon it.
We could not discount that the blood on the shirt may have been Lindsay Rose's. The struggle with the victim, Kerry, was very violent, so we needed to know his blood type. We were able to make some investigations and the blood group that Lindsay had was AB-RH negative, which is a very, very rare blood grouping.
That blood grouping was not found in the mix, but there was slightly better luck on the ballistics front.
The informant had told us that Lindsay gave him the gun, and the informant said that he sold the gun to a mate that wanted a gun for protection. He was able to tell us who that person was, and we executed a search warrant on his premises, and we found a .22 caliber target pistol with a homemade silencer.
Firing!
We had it ballistically tested, but it was inconclusive. The ballistics expert could only say that it was similar, and we couldn't prove beyond doubt that that was the murder weapon. We then come to the nose piece from the eyeglasses that was found at the scene.
This small yet significant item was found in the hallway outside the reception area where the gun battle had taken place. While Mark Lewis's eyewear was intact on the night, police now had another suspect.
We knew Lindsay Rose wore glasses, and because we found the nose piece, we were pretty sure that the glasses would have been damaged. We then interviewed every optometrist in the area where Lindsay lived. And lo and behold, 3 days after the murders, an optometrist gives us a card where a person named Lindsay Rose had put his glasses in to be repaired. Lindsay's actually signed the card and it was his signature. It's a tiny piece, but when you get all the tiny pieces of evidence coming together, it becomes crucial. So he was brought into the police centre and he was interviewed. He denied any implication in the murders. He said he knew about them, but told us that the informant that we were using was the person who had committed the murders and that another person called Donnie had done the murders with him.
Detectives believed their informant wasn't involved. But could this Donnie be more than just a name? Had Lindsay Rose slipped up and given police a key witness?
Lindsay quite often called himself the mechanic, which was a Charles Bronson term as a hitman.
You ever hear the term mechanic used outside of its normal meaning?
Yeah, it's a shooter. A hitman.
And he had an apprentice, which again came out of that movie. And we found out that Lindsay was bragging that he had an apprentice with him during this murder.
I'm telling you this because there are times when I could use a backup.
It was possible that the apprentice was the mystery man, Donnie. But as investigators delved into Rose's associates in order to get his identity, they heard some disturbing news.
The informant had told us that Lindsay had confessed to him that he'd committed a number of other murders. There was a couple in Western Sydney and the surname started with K. And he just mentioned to the informant, laughingly, I hope they enjoyed the oysters.
Being given such specific information that unfortunately was so broad made it difficult for us. So we did a lot of research at the New South Wales State Library, going through all the records of the newspapers, while at the same time my partner was off having a look at the old case files of unsolved murders. And sure, there'd been some double murders and people had been shot, but it was this information about the oysters that we were sort of looking for, this holy grail. We finally found a news clipping of unsolved murders, and it showed pictures of Edward Kavanagh and Carmelita Lee. We then went back across to the old files and started to pull apart that investigation. But there was a set of photographs taken at the crime scene by the forensic investigator, and sure enough, about the third photo I found was the hallway with a bottle of oysters that were smashed. And I remember looking at my mate and he looked at me, and we thought, well, we're on to a good thing here.
The 1984 double murder of Bill Kavanagh and his de facto Carmelita Lee had remained unsolved for 12 years.
When I first walked into the premises, you walk up the stairs onto a balcony that leads to the front door, and just inside the front door there was 2 bottles of oysters. One was completely smashed and the other one was intact.
That was never at any stage released to the media at the time of the murders or subsequently to that.
The details of the deaths had also remained a secret.
Mr. Kavanagh had been shot 4 times, once in the forehead, between the eyes.
Lindsay Rose had remarked to the informant that his first shot was a really good shot and it hit him between the eyes, and he was proud of that fact, which is something, again, that only perhaps the murderer would know.
His wife, Carmelita Lee, she also had been shot 4 times at close range. Looked like it was some sort of execution, professional hit, you could call it.
When you look at that in comparison to the other double murder, clearly that was very, very similar to what had occurred some 10 years later.
And there was one more piece of evidence from the crime scene that left investigators in little doubt that Lindsay Rose had not been bragging.
We also found some blood under Bill Kavanagh's fingernails, which was later forensically examined. We didn't have DNA in 1984, but it was grouped to find that it was common to less than 1.5% of the population of Australia.
It was ABRH negative, and Lindsay Rose was a member.
From my point of view as an investigator, this was something pretty important. Lindsay Rose has a rare blood group, and Edward Kavanagh has his rare blood group under his fingernail. We're thinking, here's something that we've got to jump on as quickly as we can.
Lindsay Rose had formed for motor vehicle offences and false pretences. Now it seemed he'd entered the big league without detection. And his ability to fly under the police radar had just continued.
We were in the Strike Force office with the boss, and he received a call from the surveillance people to say that it looked like Lindsay Rose had in some way got away from them. It caused us great concern straight away, because not only was one of the other teams looking at him for a double murder, I'd now started to kick off things and look at him for something very similar.
We were just flabbergasted. We really did not believe that they would lose him. But again, nobody's perfect. And we found out that he went into the arcade, went into a hairdresser, had his hair cut and coloured. He's a redhead and he had it coloured dark. He took his glasses off and put contact lenses on and changed his clothing. So he's actually walked out past the surveillance teams and they've just missed him.
So we had to do everything we could to try and track him down.
With Rose on the run, the hunt for the mechanic's apprentice was stepped up.
Exhaustive investigations finally came up with a name.
This is Ronald Lewis Waters.
The apprentice was Ronald Waters, but he went by the nickname Donny. Everyone knew him as Donny. We actually interviewed him and he confessed to his part in the murder.
Would you like to show and tell us what happened here on the 14th of February 1994?
Okay, we walked from the car across to here. I walked up to the door.
When you say we, who do you mean by?
Me and Lindsay Rose. I walked up to the door and I knocked on the door. and Lindsay was standing about there.
Donnie told us during the interviews that he certainly wasn't aware that Rose was going to murder anybody. He just said that he had to get into this massage parlour and his face was well known, and he would give Donnie $500 if he would just go to the door and let them see him, and when they opened the door, Lindsay would come in.
What happened then?
Then I walked inside because she let me inside and she was talking about the massage and whatnot.
What was Lindsay doing?
He was still standing there.
Yes.
And then Lindsay pushed past me with the gun.
They were expecting Kerry to be there and she wasn't. There was an 18-year-old girl there.
He forced her up here and into this room here, and there was a lounge, and he sat her just there. And then I walked over to the window and looked out the window, and there was two people, a man and a woman, walking across the road to the direction of the house. And then I heard a sort of noise, and I turned around and he'd shot the girl on the chair. And then he told me to hide.
Donnie Waters was shocked at what had gone on. He couldn't believe that he would just cold-bloodedly murder this young girl. And that's when Kerry came to the door.
And the man that was with her walked out with a rifle, aimed at me, and I didn't know if he was going to shoot me or not, so I punched him. And then I tackled him and sat on him as he was laying on the ground here. Lindsay got up me for hitting the bloke and for sitting on him because he was saying that the bloke that was on the ground was paying Lindsay to do the job. And from what I heard, he was either the boyfriend or the husband of the second girl.
That was the evidence that was missing in the original 1994 investigation. We now had an eyewitness who was willing to give evidence implicating Mark Lewis and implicating Lindsay Rose.
The detectives decided not to arrest Mark Lewis. While the circumstantial evidence of Kerry's blood on his rifle bag and shirt were now more compelling, police had a stronger case if Rose was to admit to being hired by Lewis. But they needed to find him first.
Police fear this ramshackle property at South Wentworthville could turn into a graveyard.
So in their quest to track down the contract killer, the police went public.
The informant had told us that at some stage Rose had lived at a premises and he'd secured things or hidden them in this subfloor area.
And Lindsay had told this informant that that would be a good place to hide a body.
Once home to Lindsay Rose, detectives are now digging it up to find if any murder victims are buried there.
That was something that attracted a lot of media attention, so we talked about why we were at that location.
The dig was ordered by a special police task force, Yandy, which is investigating up to 8 unsolved murders in Sydney and on the North Coast. Police want to question 42-year-old Rose over the killing of 2 women inside a massage parlour at West Ryde 3 years ago.
At this stage, I don't really want to speculate on what we expect to find inside the subfloor area.
We'd hoped that we might well have found a body or some weapons, firearms, or anything that might well have linked Lindsay Rose to one of these double murders.
While nothing of significance was found at the site, it looked like the news report had done its job. Only minutes after the story went to air, a man called with information. He told police Lindsay Rose was in Adelaide. But what if Rose had also been watching the same report?
That's probably the biggest fear of, if you know where Rose is, that he's eluded us once. I don't want to see it happen again.
Lindsay Rose had been on the run for over 10 months. That was until an observant member of the public recognised his photo and contacted the Adelaide police.
In a very short space of time, their surveillance police were able to pick up Rose, and they were able to positively identify him. And the call came back to us. We've got him here. What are your instructions? The boss and Rod Baker and myself saying, well, our instructions are get hold of him right now.
Do you agree that
You were arrested by South Australia Police at approximately 6:40 a.m. yesterday morning, being the 10th of April 1997.
It was 5:40, but yes, I was.
Oh, beg your pardon, 5:40 a.m.
To say we were ecstatic that we finally got him was an understatement. We were just overjoyed.
Detectives Baker and Appleton had jumped on the first plane to Adelaide.
On one hand, I'm thinking we're going to get there and we're going to get a stone-faced person who won't give us the time of day, or we're going to get someone who wants to talk about what's occurred over the last 10 years. And I can tell you that it's a strange feeling to be on your way, and I have to prepare for the matter, so I have to go along thinking, well, he's going to talk to me and tell me everything, so if I get that one opportunity, I'm going to have to make sure I hit the mark on everything.
Inspector Baker and I are making inquiries into the murders of an Edward Kavanagh and Carmelita Lee at Hoxton Park on or about the 20th of January 1984. Is there anything you can tell me about that?
Yes, I did it.
Okay, yeah.
I thought to myself, wow, there you go. Lindsay Rose has just confessed to murdering Kavanagh and Lee. He was so direct and so matter of fact, yes, I'm the killer. I did it.
Your answer to me before was, I did it. What do you mean? Can you tell me what you mean by that?
I went to the house there and shot him.
All right.
The Asian girl was there, and I tied her up and gagged her so she wouldn't make any noise and waited for Bill to come home.
What happened when Bill Kavanagh came home?
He walked up to the front door and saw me standing in the hallway and stopped.
And what happened then?
I shot him.
Where did you shoot him?
If I remember correctly, I hit him there.
And just describe that for me, where you mean there.
Oh, in the middle of the forehead.
Okay, and what happened when you shot him?
He hit the deck. When he fell, he dropped 2 bottles of oysters and they smashed on the floor.
The information Lindsay was giving us was just corroborating evidence that we had gathered and that the original investigators had gathered. And there was no doubt that Lindsay was the murderer. The following day, we interviewed Lindsay in relation to the Valentine's Day murders. He just readily admitted, this time, the truth about what had gone on.
I was the person involved, in company with a fellow by the name of Donnie, and I committed the murders.
Why did you shoot Fatima Osmond?
So she wouldn't cause any trouble.
Did you realise when you shot her you could kill her?
Yes.
Did that cause you any problems?
Yes.
Why?
Because she shouldn't have been there.
What happened then?
Kerry walked in the door, Mark was right behind her and he had a gun.
Were you surprised to see Mark Lewis?
Yeah, he's not supposed to be there.
What happened then?
A big melee broke out. She was screaming, Mark was screaming, Kerry was struggling with me, Mark was struggling with me, and Donnie was struggling with everybody.
I jumped on that bloke again and stayed on him, and then she ran up this hallway into that room there.
This struggle happened all the way down the hallway and we ended up in the back room.
She was still saying, no, Lindsay, you've got me already and don't kill me. And then I heard like a gargling noise.
Did you do anything else to her?
Yeah, I stabbed her.
Why did you stab her?
Because Mark was yelling and screaming that she's not dead, or something like that.
What happened then?
I shot Kerry.
Where did you shoot her?
In the eye, I think.
He showed no remorse. He showed no sense of mercy. He just related a story as it unfolded. It was quite chilling, actually.
When during the melee did your glasses get broken, do you remember?
No, it was just a blur. I think they fell off and someone stepped on them, or I stepped on them, or something, I can't recall.
Do you remember what part was broken?
Yeah, later on, I had to buy a nose piece, and I actually got new lenses made up.
Lindsay said the main reason he did the killing was that Mark Lewis had just harassed him for months and months about getting rid of his wife. They were having domestic problems and he just wanted to get rid of her.
It was just the pressure from Mark. He said, "You're going to do it, you're going to do it," and he upped the ante to 20,000. That's when I decided to do it, and I just remembered something. I got the gun off Mark Lewis. There you go. Mark Lewis supplied me with the weapon.
Lindsay Rose was then extradited to New South Wales and charged with all 4 murders. Now the detectives could do what their counterparts couldn't 3 years before. Arrest and charge the Hollywood performing Mark Lewis with the murder of his de facto wife and her workmate.
The evidence of Donnie Waters combined with DNA and scientific evidence led the jury to convict Mark Lewis of both counts of murder. He received life imprisonment for the murder of Kerry and 18 years imprisonment for the murder of Fatima. Mark Lewis is calculated as cold-blooded as Lindsay, but more of the coward type of person, not willing to do it himself, but quite willing for someone else to do his dirty work.
Donnie was given and has served an 18-month sentence for his part in the murders. As for Lindsay Rose, he will never be released. He pleaded guilty to the 2 double murders and confessed to a 5th.
This man killed 5 people and almost got away with it. Lindsay Robert Rose killed his victims in cold blood. Among his victims, Gladesville massage parlour workers Kerry Pang and Fatma Rosenall. Both were shot. Edward Kavanagh and Carmelita Lee were executed in the bedroom of their Hoxton Park home. Rose's most brutal attack, though, was on Renette Holford. During a bungled robbery, she was stabbed 32 times.
5 people died over a period of 10 years at the hands of Lindsay Rose. Ironically, a man the court had heard had used those same hands to save lives as an ambulance officer at the Granville train disaster.
Chicago, winter of 1991. The city is a sheet of dirty ice and restless sirens, a skyline of cold glass watching everything and saying nothing. On the south side, under a flickering streetlight near an abandoned lot, a patrol car rolls to a stop at 3:17 a.m. The call came in as possible body. The officer steps out, breath fogging in the air, boots grinding over frozen gravel and broken beer bottles. His flashlight cuts through the dark like a knife, and then it stops. The beam finds a shoe, a hand, a face staring up at the night, eyes open, glazed over with frost. 19-year-old college student, waitress, big city dreams. Now a headline waiting to be written. The radio crackles as backup is called, but for a moment there's just silence. The sound of the city is muffled here, swallowed by the emptiness of the lot. Yellow tape unspools in the wind. A detective, coat collar turned up against the cold, ducks under the tape with a tired motion that says he's done this too many times. But there's something about this one, the way the body is laid out carefully, almost gently. The missing purse, the absence of struggle on the ground. It doesn't look random, it looks deliberate. Her name is printed on a student ID card still in her pocket. Melissa Carter, 19, journalism major at a community college, lives 3 bus stops away, works late nights at a diner on 18th Street, the kind of girl who studies in the back booth with a refill of black coffee and a notebook full of underlined quotes. The detective stares at the ID, at the frozen face, and the question forms instantly, the same question that will haunt a community for decades. Who wanted her gone badly enough to do this, here, like this? Forensics moves in, quiet, methodical. Cameras click. Chalk marks the placement of every cigarette butt, every empty can, every footprint in the slush. A single key glints near her hand, crusted with mud. No keychain, just one key, scratched, the numbers on it nearly worn away. An officer bags it, labels it, passes it along. It's just another piece of metal in a city full of broken locks and deadbolts, but later, much later, they'll say it was the detail that never sat right. The early light creeps in over the horizon, washing the lot in a dull gray. By 6 a.m., the first reporter is there, shivering in a thin coat, microphone in hand, voice shaking not from fear, but from the cold, as she rehearses her stand-up. Chicago police are investigating the death of a 19-year-old college student found in an abandoned lot. The words are standard. Routine. Another tragedy in a city that's seen too many. Nobody knows yet that this isn't just another case, it's a fuse that's just been lit. At the morgue, under harsh fluorescent lights, a medical examiner pulls on latex gloves and leans over the table. He notes the bruises, the ligature marks, the time of death, sometime between midnight and 2 a.m., cause Strangulation. There are signs of a struggle, skin under her fingernails. But there's something odd. No sexual assault, no robbery. Her jewelry is still there. Her watch, a cheap gold-toned band, is missing. Not expensive, not unique. Just gone. Just enough to feel wrong. By mid-morning, a detective is knocking on the door of a small third-floor walk-up apartment, paint peeling, heat barely working, the kind of place a student rents by counting tips and clipping coupons. Inside, a woman opens the door, eyes rimmed red, clutching a coffee mug like it's the only thing keeping her upright, Melissa's mother. Behind her, the girl's room is still exactly how she left it. Textbooks open on the bed, a poster peeling off the wall, a backpack half-zipped. Everything paused at the exact moment her life was cut off. How did this happen? She was just going to work and coming home, that's all, the mother says, voice breaking. The detective doesn't answer. He just writes, underlines, thinks. Diner, late shift, walk home. Somewhere between neon lights and an abandoned lot, someone made a choice. The story hits the evening news before the sun fully sets. Teenage student found dead. Routine words, but the photo that appears on the screen, a smiling girl with dark hair, eyes full of plans, sparks something. Neighbors see it, classmates see it, customers from the diner see it. They call in, one after another, each voice adding a new fragment. She always walked the same route. She said someone was watching her last week. She got a weird phone call at the diner a few nights ago. Rumors move faster than patrol cars. Fear moves faster than facts. In living rooms across Chicago, people watch, fork paused halfway to mouth, hand frozen halfway to remote. A 19-year-old, walking home, dead in a lot a few blocks away from where they live, work, sleep. It could have been anyone. It could have been their daughter, their sister, their neighbor. The city exhales one long, uneasy breath. Another case, another headline, but this one feels like a cold hand on the back of the neck. No one knows yet that this murder will outlive mayors, police chiefs, entire task forces, that it will turn into a phrase whispered in the neighborhood like a curse. The Carter girl case. No one knows that evidence is being sealed in plastic bags and cardboard boxes that will gather dust for years, waiting for science that doesn't exist yet, waiting for a detective who hasn't even joined the force. Right now, it's just a fresh crime scene, still wet with snow, ringed with tape, buzzing with radios. Right now, it's just day one. A new entry in a thick, heavy file that will one day be stamped with two words that will shock an entire city. Cold case. Solved. Or that's what they'll be told. Before she was a file number and a cold case pinned to a board, before her name became shorthand for a failure that haunted an entire precinct, Melissa Carter was just a girl trying to outrun the weight of a city that didn't care if she made it or not. Her story didn't start in that frozen lot. It started in a cramped apartment 3 blocks from the train tracks, where the walls were thin and the dreams had to be loud just to be heard over the noise. She grew up on the 3rd floor of a tired brick building that shook every time the L roared past. In summer, heat pooled in the hallways like steam. In winter, the radiators banged and wheezed and sometimes went cold at the worst possible moments. The window in her bedroom didn't close all the way. She learned to sleep with socks on and an extra blanket pulled up over her head. Outside, sirens were not an event. They were background music. Her mother worked nights cleaning offices downtown, leaving the apartment just as the evening news started. She'd come home with chemical burns on her hands and sore feet, carrying leftover sandwiches from polished conference rooms where people in suits had made decisions that would never touch this neighborhood except as headlines. She'd set those sandwiches on the table like treasure, and Melissa would eat while flipping through the newspaper, circling stories she didn't always fully understand but felt drawn to anyway. Her father was a ghost, a name on old papers, a fading photo in the back of a drawer. He'd gone when she was young enough for everyone to think she wouldn't remember, but old enough to know what it felt like to watch a back walk down a hallway and never come back. She learned early that some people leave and never look over their shoulders. She also learned that staying and fighting for something was a choice you had to make every day. School didn't impress her, but words did. She devoured everything she could get her hands on, newspapers, magazines, flyers stuffed under the door. The city told its story through ink, and she wanted in. Teachers wrote things like strong voice and persistent on her report cards. She wrote "Get Out" on the margins of her notebooks, next to lists of colleges she couldn't yet afford, next to rent numbers and tip goals. The community college down the line was her first step. It wasn't glamorous, no sweeping lawns, no dormitories, no ivy-climbing old walls, just low buildings, fluorescent lights, and classrooms that smelled like stale coffee. But it had a small journalism program, a newspaper, a bulletin board covered in clippings. It had teachers who talked about watchdogs and accountability and the power of asking the right question at the wrong time. She worked the night shift at the Atlantic Diner to pay for those classes. The diner was a long, narrow strip of buzzing light in a neighborhood that always seemed one bad moment away from a police report. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a counter that had seen 1,000 spilled coffees and 1,000 late-night confessions. Grease on the air, neon in the window, the radio in the corner always a little too loud. To some people, it was just a place to eat at odd hours. To Melissa, it was a newsroom without desks. Every table was a story. Cops, truckers, nurses, drunks, lonely insomniacs staring into their third refill. They all brought pieces of the city in with them. She listened, memorized, scribbled shorthand notes on order pads between coffee refills. She was the kind of person who could take your order and your secrets in the same breath and you wouldn't even notice. Her mother worried about the hours, about the walk home, about the way the world shifted after midnight. Take the bus all the way, she'd say. No shortcuts, no alleys. I don't care if it's cold. I don't care if you're tired. Melissa would nod, kiss her on the cheek, and then do what everyone in that zip code eventually did. Weigh the risk against the clock, against the tips, against the exhaustion, and make small compromises with herself. The night she died, the city was sliding into winter, the kind of cold that made everything sharper. It was a Thursday. Thursdays at the diner were always strange. Not quite weekend, not quite weekday. The regulars came. A few new faces drifted in. The cook swore the grill was cursed because it always acted up on Thursdays. The neon sign out front buzzed and flickered like it was fighting to stay lit. Melissa clocked in just before the dinner rush, tucking her hair back under a loose ponytail, tying her apron with the practiced motion of someone who could do it in the dark. She moved like she knew the place intimately. Aisles, corners, the exact squeak of the third stool at the counter. Her name tag, Melissa in block letters, caught the light every time she turned. As the shift wore on, the crowd thinned. The families with kids left first. The couples followed. By 11 p.m., the diner became what it always became at that hour, a way station for people between somewhere and somewhere else. A pair of truckers hunched over burgers at the back. A nurse in scrubs, too tired to speak, collapsing into a booth with a cup of coffee she'd barely touch. A man in a dark coat at the counter, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes drifting, lingering. He'd been in before. She recognized the shape of him more than the details, the coat that always looked a size too big, the quiet way he sat, the way he seemed to listen to everything without joining in. He never flirted, never joked, just watched, left cash, left tips that didn't fit the amount he ordered. The other waitresses rolled their eyes. Lonely type, they said. Harmless. In a city full of obvious danger, someone who just sat and stared didn't rank very high on the scale. At 11:47 p.m., the phone on the wall behind the counter rang. Not the sound of a personal line. The sharp, almost metallic ring of a payphone wired into the building meant more for deliveries and drunk misdials than anything serious. Melissa wiped her hands, stepped over, pressed the receiver to her ear. Atlantic Diner, this is Melissa. Static, then breathing. Slow, even. Not panicked, not hurried, just there, like someone had leaned in too close. Hello? She said, a crease forming between her eyebrows. You've reached the diner. You want to place an order? The breathing continued. She could hear something faint in the background. Maybe traffic, maybe a TV, maybe nothing at all. She glanced over her shoulder at the cook, who was scraping the grill. He didn't look up. If you don't say anything, I'm hanging up, she said, irritation sliding over the thin line of unease in her chest. There was a pause, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath with you. Then the line went dead. No words, no click, just silence. She hung up, exhaled, rolled her shoulders. There was a moment where she almost grabbed an order pad and wrote it down. Old habit, strange call. 11:47. Instead, she just muttered, creep, under her breath and moved on, refilling the trucker's coffee, dropping off a slice of pie for the nurse with a soft smile. The man in the dark coat watched her. His coffee had gone cold. He didn't seem to notice. Closing came slowly that night. One by one, the customers left. The bell over the door chimed, each sound marking the place thinning out. At some point, the truckers paid and left. The nurse dragged herself out with a quiet, thank you. The man in the coat remained, like a piece of furniture that didn't know when to move. At 11:58, he laid a few bills on the counter and slid off the stool. As he stood, he gave her a small nod. Too deliberate, too practiced, she nodded back, polite, trained. Night, he said, voice low. Have a good one, she answered automatically. He walked out into the cold, the door shut, the neon hummed. Guy gives me the creeps, the other waitress said quietly, watching his back disappear past the window. He's just lonely, the cook grunted. Lonely doesn't pay the bills, but his tips do. Let him be. In the corner of the counter, on a napkin nobody would notice until later, Melissa wrote 3 words in small, cramped letters, half a joke, half not. Strange caller tonight. Then she circled the time, 11:47. The napkin would be swept up, thrown away, lost. That tiny instinctive note would disappear into a plastic trash bag, carried out the back door into the same darkness she would soon step into. At 12:23 a.m., She clocked out. The little machine punched the card with a soft, final clack. She pulled on her denim jacket, too thin for that kind of cold, but all she had, wrapped a scarf around her neck twice, shoved her notebook and a dog-eared textbook into her bag. "You want me to call you a cab?" the cook asked, the question he always asked, more ritual than real offer. "I'm fine," she said. She always said that. 3 bus stops, 10 minutes. I could walk it in my sleep. "Yeah, that's what I am afraid of," he muttered. But he didn't press. Nobody did. In that neighborhood, you learned to pick your battles, and you didn't always have the energy to fight the ones you knew you might lose. She pushed open the door. The bell chimed softly one last time. The cold hit her face like a slap. Her breath turned to smoke in the air. Streetlights cast yellow halos on the thin layer of snow that had started to form on the sidewalk. She walked, past the shuttered storefronts with metal grates pulled down like eyelids, past the liquor store with the barred windows and the half-burnt-out sign, past the bus stop with the cracked plastic shelter where a torn poster flapped in the wind, advertising a concert that had already happened. The city around her was not sleeping. It was just quieter, like it was waiting for something. Somewhere down the block, a radio played faintly from an open window. A dog barked, bored, behind a fence. A car rolled past slowly, tires crunching over slush, headlights briefly washing her in white before sliding away. She knew this route, knew which patches of sidewalk were cracked, which streetlights flickered, which porch belonged to the old woman who sometimes sat outside even in the cold, watching everything. Tonight, the porch was empty. The windows were dark, curtains drawn. At the bus stop, she could have waited. She'd done it before. But waiting in the cold, alone, in front of a darkened street at that hour felt worse than walking. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, glanced at the empty street, and kept moving, taking the shortcut she'd taken 100 times, a narrow side street that cut behind a warehouse, shaving minutes off the walk, trading visibility for speed. The warehouse loomed up on her left, a hulking shadow with boarded-up windows and graffiti climbing its walls. The lot where her body would be found lay just beyond it, a rectangle of dirt and trash and broken glass. It was the kind of place everyone knew about and nobody cared about. Kids cut through it during the day. At night, it belonged to whoever was brave or foolish or desperate enough to claim it. At 12:38 a.m., according to the best reconstruction the detectives would build years later, she stepped off the main sidewalk and into that stretch of space where streetlights didn't quite reach. In the apartment building next door, the couple lay in bed, half asleep, TV glow flickering on their bedroom wall, the volume low, the city's endless hum rolling beneath it. The woman would later tell detectives she heard a voice outside, a girl's voice, sharp, angry, cutting through the muffled quiet. Another voice answered, lower, harder to catch. Then a sound she'd never forget, a thud, a gasp that sounded too close to the way someone might breathe if they were choking on air. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, nudging her husband. He shifted, frowned, listened for a moment. The sound outside blurred into the rest of the city, shouting, distant, something hitting something, a car door maybe, a muffled cry. "It's late," he mumbled. "It's just people fighting. Go back to sleep." She thought about getting up, about looking, about pulling the curtain aside and checking. Her feet never touched the floor. Fear, habit, exhaustion, they all held her down. In that neighborhood, curiosity was not a virtue. It was a liability. In the lot, under this cover of darkness and falling snow, something terrible and fast and final was happening. A hand on a wrist, a bag pulled away, a struggle, fingers clawing at skin, nails digging in deep enough to drag something invisible and damming away under them, air cut off, the body's desperate automatic fight against the simple fact of not being allowed to breathe. Nobody saw the exact moment when her knees hit the ground. Nobody heard the last thing she tried to say. No one would ever be able to say whether she recognized the face above her, or if he was just a shadow, a shape, a weight. At 3:17 a.m., an anonymous voice called in a tip from a payphone 8 blocks away. "There's a body in the lot off 43rd, the man said, behind the old warehouse." The dispatcher asked his name. The line went dead. The city kept moving. Trucks drove past. Trains rattled overhead. Somewhere, a newspaper printing press churned out tomorrow's headlines, none of which yet carried her name. In her bedroom, the textbooks sat open where she'd left them, a highlighter uncapped, a sentence half underlined. On the fridge, a clipping was taped crookedly, an article about a young reporter who'd broken a corruption story downtown. In the margin, in her handwriting, 3 words, "This'll be me." She had thousands of steps left in her life that she would never take, stories she'd never write, questions she'd never ask. Instead, in that lot, in that cold, her world narrowed to a single brutal moment and then stopped. By the time dawn crept over the horizon, she was no longer a girl walking home from the diner. She was a scene, a file, a problem. By the time the first camera pointed at that lot, she was a headline waiting to be written, a case waiting to freeze, a question that would hang over Chicago for more than 2 decades, repeating the same unfinished sentence every time someone walked past that block and remembered. How does a girl walk out of the light and vanish into the dark between one street and the next? The first person to really see her wasn't the killer, and it wasn't the neighbor who rolled over and went back to sleep after hearing a muffled argument through the wall. It was a rookie in a patrol car, riding shotgun on the dead side of the shift, eyes half on the road, half on the clock, thinking more about his next day off than whatever waited in the dark just beyond the reach of his headlights. He almost missed her. The call came in as a disturbance, not even that, a vague report. Something weird in the lot, the dispatcher said. No shouting, no gunshots, just a man's voice on the line, flat clipped, giving directions like he was reading them off a map. There's a body in the lot off 43rd behind the old warehouse. Then click. No name, no description, no follow-up. The older officer behind the wheel grumbled when the address popped up on the screen. It's probably nothing. Kids screwing around, drunk, passed out. We'll check it, clear it, move on. He'd said some version of that 100 times. The cruiser rolled down 43rd. Engine low, light bar dark, snow feathered against the windshield. The lot appeared the way it always did at night. A black rectangle cut out of the city, ringed with bent chain link and broken glass, the warehouse hulking beside it like a sleeping animal. The headlights swung across the ground, catching uneven mounds of trash, tire tracks frozen into ruts, the rusted shell of an old car with no wheels. Looks empty, the older cop muttered. Hold up, the rookie said. His voice had changed, tightened. The older cop put the car in park. Both doors opened in the same moment. Boots hit frozen gravel. Their breath plumed out in gray clouds. The rookie's flashlight clicked on, beams slicing through the darkness, skipping over cans, a broken pallet, a shredded plastic bag tangled in weeds. Then it stopped. Jesus, he whispered. She lay near the center of the lot, where the ground dipped slightly, forming a shallow depression that collected rain in warmer months, trash in all months. Tonight it collected her. One arm bent at an angle that didn't make sense, fingers curled, nails broken, eyes open, staring at a sky that didn't care. Officer 1209, possible DOA, the older cop said into his radio, voice suddenly clipped, all the lazy gone. Female, appears late teens, early 20s. Send backup, we need detectives, crime scene, medical examiner, scene is unsecured. They moved in slow, careful arcs, flashlights sweeping, eyes trained to separate random debris from evidence that mattered. The rookie wanted to kneel next to her, to touch her shoulder, close her eyes, do something human. Training held him back. The first crime scene you see stays with you. Years later, he'd still remember the way her hair fanned out on the frozen dirt, the way one shoelace was untied, the way her mouth was half open, like she'd died in the middle of trying to say one last word. The first detective arrived with his coat collar turned up, hands shoved deep in his pockets, face set in that familiar mix of resignation and focus. It was 1991. He'd seen more bodies than he could count. Each one was supposed to be just another case. But he felt it as soon as he ducked under the tape that was already going up, yellow fluttering in the wind. Something about the age, the clothes, the way the rookie's face looked like it might break. What do we have? He asked quietly. Female, no ID on her, no purse, the older officer said. Looks like strangulation, bruising on the neck, signs of a struggle. The detective crouched down, knees cracking, eyes scanning, bruises on the wrists, red marks on the throat, scratches on her hands, skin lodged under fingernails frozen into place. She hadn't gone easily. That told him something about her. Told him something about whoever had been on the other end of that fight. He nodded to the evidence techs as they arrived, their movements practiced and oddly gentle. Photos were taken from every angle, measurements, sketches, every cigarette butt, every footprint, every piece of trash got a number, a marker shoved into the ground like a tiny flag staked into the battlefield of what had happened there. Get me a wide perimeter, he said. I don't want some idiot cutting through this lot on their way to work and trampling all over my crime scene. The medical examiner arrived in a van that always smelled faintly of antiseptic and something nobody ever named. He knelt, gloved hands hovering just above her skin before they touched. Young, he murmured. Late teens, maybe 19. She's been here a few hours. Time of death somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m., rough estimate. Sexual assault? The detective asked. Too early to say for sure. The examiner's voice stayed neutral. We'll know more at the post. He looked up, met the detective's eyes. But whoever did this put their hands on her neck and didn't stop until she was gone. That I can tell you. The detective stood, exhaled, looked out over the lot again. Empty windows watched from the building next door. Curtains closed, lights off. But he knew. Someone had heard something. Someone had seen a car, a shadow, the wrong person in the wrong place. The city was never as blind as it pretended to be. By the time the body was lifted carefully onto the gurney and loaded into the van, the sky was lightening, the gray of early morning creeping in. The flash of cameras cut through it. Not just the evidence text now, but a reporter who'd been listening to the scanner and showed up with a cameraman still half asleep, shrugging on his coat as he stepped out of the news van. "Detective, can we get a statement?" the reporter called. "Is this gang-related? Do you have any suspects?" The detective hated this part, the dance between saying enough to calm a community and not saying enough to compromise a case. "We're in the early stages," he said, standard line. "We have an unidentified female victim, approximately late teens. We're working to establish identity and notify next of kin. If anyone in the area saw or heard anything in the early hours of the morning, we urge them to come forward." Behind the caution tape, a small crowd had already gathered, morning commuters who'd taken one look at the squad cars and lights and slowed down. People in heavy coats holding styrofoam cups, breath steaming. A kid on a bike, gloves off, fingers red, gripping the handlebars as he craned his neck to see. Word spread fast, the way it always does. They found a girl in the lot, another body. I heard she was from the block. I heard she was a waitress. Nobody knew yet, but everyone had something to say. At the morgue, under harsh white light, the detective stood behind glass as the medical examiner began the autopsy. He watched because that was the job. He watched because every mark, every bruise, every tiny injury told a story about what had been done to her, and he needed to hear it even if it meant it would replay in his head for the rest of his life. Strangulation confirmed. No signs of sexual assault. No drugs in her system, at least not the obvious ones. Time of death narrowed. Sometime after she clocked out of the diner and before the anonymous call, the window tightening into something they could work with. They found a student ID card in her jacket pocket, tucked behind a folded bus pass and a crumpled receipt. Melissa Carter, Community College. A smiling photo taken under fluorescent lights where she'd tried to look serious and ended up looking stubborn instead. When he knocked on the apartment door that morning, ID in hand, he already knew what he was bringing inside. The worst job in the world, delivered in a few sentences that would split a life into before and after. Her mother opened the door in a worn housecoat, hair tied up, eyes ringed with the kind of tired that went deeper than lack of sleep. The television was on behind her, low volume, morning news anchors smiling at nothing. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat on the table, one chair empty, set as if for someone who was supposed to be there. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked. "Yes?" Her eyes flicked to the badge, then back to his face. Fear moved in, quick, sharp. "I'm Detective Harris with the Chicago Police Department," he said. "Can we come in?" She let them in, hands already shaking. She knew. They always knew somehow, before the words came, before the sentence finished. "I'm afraid I have some bad news," he began. She backed up, one hand going to her mouth, as if she could push the words back in before they landed. "No," she whispered. "No, she just went to work. She's never late. Sometimes she stays to study, but she always calls if—" "There was an incident last night," he said, steady with it. "We found a young woman in a lot off 43rd. We recovered identification on the body. It matches your daughter. We believe it's Melissa. I'm so sorry." She shook her head, little jerks like she was trying to rattle the meaning loose. "No, you believe. You're not sure, right? It could be someone else. People steal IDs. We'll need you to come down to the morgue to make a formal identification," he said. He hated the way that sounded. Formal, clinical, like she wasn't talking about her child. Later, standing behind glass, she pressed a trembling hand against it as they pulled the sheet back. The sound she made wasn't a scream. It was smaller, more broken, the sound of something inside collapsing. "That's my baby," she said, voice barely there. "That's my baby." Back at the precinct, her photo went up on the board. 19, student, waitress. The words, "last seen leaving work," written in black marker under her name. A rough map of the area around the diner and her apartment went up next to it. Red circles, arrows, the lot, the bus stop, the route she should have walked without ever once appearing on a crime report. The first wave of interviews began immediately. Co-workers at the diner. "She was fine," the cook said, hands still stained with grease, apron thrown on in a hurry. "Tired, but fine. We had a weird phone call. She brushed it off. That guy at the counter was in here again. The quiet one. I didn't like the way he watched her, but he didn't do anything. We close up, she leaves. Same as always." Other waitresses. "She said she felt like someone had been watching her the past week, like eyes on her when she walked home. I told her she was paranoid. Everybody feels that way around here." Customers. "I was in there," a nurse said, still in scrubs, voice hollow. "She brought me coffee. She smiled. She looked normal. You never think that's the last time you'll see somebody's face." Her classmates. "She talked about wanting to write big stories," a girl with thick glasses and a stack of textbooks said, gripping her backpack straps so hard her knuckles went white. "She said she wanted to tell the truth about this city. I told her to be careful what she wished for. It was a joke. Just a stupid joke." Her boyfriend, Jason, sat in the interview room with his hands clenched into fists, knuckles raw where he'd been punching walls, tear tracks still drying on his cheeks. The detective had been doing this long enough to know where everyone would point first. Lovers, exes, the ones closest to the victim. What time did you last see her? Harris asked, tape recorder whirring quietly on the table. Yesterday afternoon, Jason said. She came by my place before her shift. We argued about nothing. It was stupid. I told her she worked too much. She told me I didn't get it. We made up. She left. That's it. I was at my buddy's place watching the game last night. We got pizza at like 11. You can ask them. I wasn't anywhere near there. We will, the detective said. Did she ever mention anyone bothering her, someone at the diner, on the bus? Jason stared at the wall for a long moment. She said she thought someone was following her once, he murmured. Said she'd seen the same guy on the train a couple times. Long coat, quiet. I told her she should tell somebody. She laughed it off, said she was just practicing being paranoid like a real reporter. Every answer seemed to lead back to the same vague shape. A man in a coat, a quiet presence, eyes that watched without speaking. Not a name, not an address, just a blur where a suspect should be. Tips came in. They always did. Some sincere, some wild, some cruel, blaming her for walking alone, for working late, for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The detectives sifted through them, chasing the ones that sounded like they had teeth. A neighbor swore he'd seen a blue sedan idling near the lot around midnight. Engine was running, lights off. I thought it was weird, but I was tired. I went back to bed. He couldn't give a plate number. Just blue and sedan and maybe foreign, but I'm not a car guy. Another caller claimed the anonymous tipster was a local drug dealer who used that lot. He saw the body and didn't want to be tied to it, the voice on the line said. He doesn't like cops, but he doesn't like dead girls in his territory either. No name, no confirmation. The key they'd found near her hand went up on the board too, a little brass question mark in a plastic bag. Not her apartment key, not her mother's, not her boyfriend's, not labeled in any way that made it easy. They took it to locksmiths, who shrugged and said, "Looks like a standard cut." Standard was the enemy. Standard meant it could have been any door in any building with a broken lock and a bad reputation. The partial DNA they lifted from under her nails went off to the lab. In 1991, that meant weeks, not hours. The technology was good enough to tempt, not strong enough to save. The detective circled the lab request date in red on the board, a small, stubborn act, as if underlining it could make the results come faster. Outside the precinct, the story took on a life of its own. Young student slain on way home from work. Neighborhood on edge after late-night murder. The local papers ran her school photo. The TV station showed footage of the lot, the tape, the flashing lights, the stuffed animal someone had left on the fence post like a tiny, desperate offering. At the diner, someone taped her picture to the wall next to the coffee pots. Beneath it, in bold black marker, they wrote, "Who did this?" Every cop who came in for a late-night cup had to look at that question. Some looked away quickly, some stared, jaw tight. None had an answer. Days passed. The trail cooled. Witnesses who might have seen something moved, disappeared, changed their stories. The map on the board stayed the same. The red circles started to feel like targets they could never hit. In a different city and a different story, this is where the miracle tip comes in. The dramatic confession, the clear fingerprint, the one piece of evidence that drops into a detective's lap like a gift. But this was Chicago, 1991, and this was a case that had no intention of giving up its secrets quickly. So the file stayed open, but began to slide into the stack, from front to middle, from middle to back. The detectives weren't lazy, they weren't indifferent, they were drowning. New bodies, new scenes, new families demanding justice right now. The Carter case never closed. It just got quieter. Her mother called every week at first, every Monday like clockwork. Any news? Same question, same answer. We're working it. Eventually the calls came once a month, then once every few. Then only on anniversaries when the weight of the date pressed down so hard it forced the phone into her hand. The partial DNA report came back. A profile, but not enough. No match in any existing database. A ghost in the machine. In the evidence room, the boxes were labeled, sealed, and stacked. Jacket, bus pass, photos, key, swabs, slides. One box among hundreds, each containing somebody's worst night. On the street, the lot was the same. Kids still cut through it during the day. At night, people walked faster when they passed. Some crossed to the other side of the street, some didn't. The city kept moving. Years would go by before anyone opened that box again for more than a cursory glance. Years before a new detective, under a different ceiling with different machines humming in the background, would pull it down and decide that this girl, this case, this frozen night, still had something to say. But for now, in 1991, it settled in. A fresh tragedy turned into a lingering question. A living girl turned into a line on a board. A murder turned into 2 words spoken with a quiet shake of the head in the cold case unit hallway. Carter. Unsolved. Years have the way of sanding the edges off even the sharpest tragedies, at least on the surface. The city changes its skyline, swaps out mayors, opens new malls on ground that used to be dirt and glass and yellow tape. Crime scenes become parking lots. Murders become anniversaries. The Carter case doesn't go away. It just Sinks. Detective Harris doesn't forget. He can't. The photo of Melissa stays in his bottom drawer beneath a stack of newer files. Some days he opens it without meaning to, fingers brushing the edges of her face, the tape still clinging where it used to be pinned to the board. 19, journalism student, server, strangled in a lot that now rents spaces by the hour. The file is never officially closed. It's just marked with the words, every cop in the building hates reading, even more than case dismissed or not guilty. Inactive, pending leads, cold. Years slide by, the suit jackets change, the ties go out of style. The station gets computers on every desk. Fax machines become email, patrol cars get laptops bolted to the dash. The murder board where Melissa's face once sat at the center gets replaced by a digital projection screen. But in the evidence room, the boxes don't care what decade it is. The one with her name is easy to miss. Plain cardboard, typed label, Carter Melissa, 1991. Inside, under layers of paper and plastic, are all the things that used to belong to a living girl. The denim jacket, still carrying a faint, greasy ghost of diner food. The cracked bus pass, the student ID, the photographs, the little envelope holding the brass key that opens nothing anyone's found. The slides and swabs and tubes that say more about the man who killed her than about her. Every once in a while, a new detective lands on night shift and wanders into the evidence room, pulled by the strange gravity of old cases. They pick up boxes at random, read labels, skim through dusty reports to scare themselves or inspire themselves, depending on the hour. The Carter file becomes one of those stories older cops tell younger ones when the room gets too quiet. Don't get cocky, somebody says. You think you're good? We never cleared Carter. Girl was walking home from work just like that. We had nothing. No prints, no confession, no car, no nothing. Left us holding our own incompetence in our hands. It wasn't incompetence, Harris snaps, the one time he hears that word used out loud. Sometimes all you get is what you get, and it's not enough. He retires eventually. They all do. Exit interview, sheet cake in the break room, a watch he'll never wear. People shake his hand, clap his shoulder, tell him he did good work, that he should rest. He smiles in the right places and makes the right jokes. Then he goes home, sits in a quiet house that doesn't know his name, and thinks about 19-year-old girls who never made it past the edge of an empty lot. Across the city, in a small apartment that never stopped feeling too quiet, Melissa's mother builds her life around absence. Her daughter's room stays almost exactly the same. Dust builds on the textbooks. The highlighter dries up next to the unfinished sentence. The clipping on the fridge browns at the edges. Every year on the anniversary, she takes the bus to the cemetery with a bunch of flowers she can barely afford, standing in front of the headstone with a name that still feels like it belongs in the present tense, not carved into stone. For a while, she's loud. She calls the detectives. She writes letters. She harasses local reporters, stands in front of their cameras with her grief turned into a weapon. Somebody knows something, she says into microphones, into radio shows, into community meetings. Somebody saw him. Somebody heard her. Don't you dare tell me this is just how it is. People listen, for a while. Then life does what it always does to the living. It keeps demanding their attention. Bills, illness, work, other crimes, other funerals. The name Melissa Carter stops leading the nightly news. The lot where she died gets paved. A tire shop opens next door. Someone paints over the graffiti. Kids drag their bikes across asphalt that was once frozen dirt and blood. Nobody puts up a plaque. Her mother doesn't stop. She just gets quieter about it. Grief moves from shouting to murmuring, from public to private. She still calls, but less. She still watches the news every night, waiting for a miracle headline. It never comes. Not at first. The calendar flips enough times that the year 1991 starts to sound less like just the other day and more like back then. DNA, once a miracle, becomes standard. The lab that took weeks to process a single sample now runs hundreds. Databases expand. States share information. Cold case units pop up like small, stubborn, resistant cells against time itself. By the early 2000s, Chicago has one. A cramped office, several floors up, where old coffee mugs share desk space with stacks of files marked in thick red ink. Unsolved. Victim photos stare down from the walls like a jury. The detectives who work there don't get the chases, the sirens, the fresh scenes. They get boxes that smell like dust and regret. They get families who have learned to live on maybe someday. One of the desks belongs to Detective Erin Novak. She didn't grow up on the South Side. She didn't know the Carter family. In 1991, she was still a kid giving vacant smiles in her own school photos. Her decision to become a cop didn't come from Melissa or any of the names on the wall. It came much later from different headlines. But the thing that brought her into the cold case unit is the same thing that keeps her there. She hates loose ends. On her first week, the unit commander pushes a rolling cart into the center of the room, stacked high with files. Welcome to the museum, he says dryly. Pick a ghost. Some detectives go for the thick files, the famous cases, the ones that made front pages and documentaries and rumor. Novak doesn't. She goes for a middle box, thin, almost apologetic. Carter Melissa, 1991. She lifts it, feels its weight. Not much, not compared to some of the others. But she knows enough to be wary of thin files. Sometimes thin doesn't mean simple. She opens it at her desk. There she is, 19. The school photo, the diner uniform, the shot from the crime scene, black and white, grainy. The lot, the tape, the chalk marks, the statements. Harris's handwriting, sharp and tired in the margins. The medical examiner's report. The list of persons of interest, names crossed out in red one by one. At the bottom of the first evidence log, in a box labeled DNA, there's a line drawn in pen. Partial profile. No match. Hold for future testing. Novak stares at that line for a long moment. Future testing, she thinks. That's me. That's now. She flips through the rest. The key, still unidentified. The anonymous caller, never traced. The vague description of the blue sedan. A composite of a man in a coat, based on the hazy memory of a waitress and a boyfriend's uneasy recollection. It's all like smoke. And yet under it there's something solid. The skin cells under Melissa's nails. She asks for the box from evidence. It arrives the next day, seal still intact, tape yellowed around the edges. The tech in the evidence room signs it over with a shrug. Some of this stuff has been frozen longer than you've been on the job, he says. Don't get your hopes up. Age isn't kind to samples. Hope isn't the word she'd use. Stubbornness, maybe. Obligation. She breaks the seal. Inside, wrapped and labeled, are the artifacts of a night that never stopped happening for the people who loved Melissa. Jacket, shoes, the bag with the key, the little cardboard slide boxes from the original swabs, all of it tagged in thick black marker. Can we get anything off these? She asks the lab. Maybe, the head tech says, adjusting his glasses, peering at the labels like they're hieroglyphs. We've got better amplification now. The partial profile from back then is a start. We can run it again through CODIS, see if anything hits. There's more in the system now. People who weren't there in 91. People who were kids then and have rap sheets now. And if we still don't get a direct hit, she says. He glances up at her. Then we see how far you want to go down the rabbit hole. Because by then, in the corners of the forensic world, another tool is quietly changing the rules. No press conferences, no dramatic announcements. Just a slow, creeping revolution, genetic genealogy, not just comparing crime scene DNA to known offenders, but building family trees from partial profiles and distant relatives who spat into tubes to learn their heritage and ended up unknowingly volunteering their bloodlines to murder investigations. It's controversial, it's powerful, it's not something you deploy on every open file. But a 19-year-old strangled on her way home from work, a case that's been cold since the first George Bush administration, that's the kind of file that makes people say, try everything. The dried swab from under Melissa's fingernails is carefully thawed, processed, split. Part of it goes back into secure storage. Part of it goes into the machine. The machine hums, lights blinking. Data appears where no data existed in 1991. Novak waits. Cold cases teach you patience in a way fresh ones never can. You learn to live in the spaces between submitted and results pending, between no and not yet. The new profile comes back cleaner, stronger, more markers. They feed it into CODIS. The system churns, compares, cross-references with tens of thousands of offenders, arrestees, crime scene profiles from other states. No direct match. She half expected that. The man who killed Melissa wasn't the type to be rolling in and out of jail for obvious crimes. If he had been, someone would have tripped over him years ago. But there is something. A faint hit. A partial overlap with a profile from an entirely different case in an entirely different state. Not the killer. A relative. Distant but definite. A branch of a tree brushing against the edge of hers. The lab calls her in, shows her the screen, numbers and percentages, relationship estimates, third cousin maybe, fourth. Some man in Indiana, arrested on a burglary, swabbed, processed, filed away, not a murderer. At least not that anyone knows, but his genes say he shares a little bit of history with the man whose skin cells rode out of that lot under a dead girl's nails. The lab tech leans back in his chair. This isn't a smoking gun, he says. It's a map. Faded, torn, missing half the landmarks, but it points somewhere. Where? Novak asks. He taps the screen. Out there. Into his family, into everyone who shares enough of his DNA to show up like this. You follow those names, you follow those lines, you might find someone who lived in Chicago in 1991. Someone the right age, the right sex, with the right kind of access. Or we might find nothing, she says. He shrugs. Yeah, or that. Welcome to the job. She takes the printout back to her desk. It's not much, but it's more than Harris ever had. She thinks of him, of the thin note in the file, hold for future testing, like he'd been writing to her specifically, or to whoever would come along with better machines and more stubborn patience. She pins the new chart next to Melissa's photo on her own board. Old ink, new ink. 1991, 2012. Same eyes staring out from the center. Outside the window, the city rolls on. A siren wails in the distance. Somewhere, a fresh crime scene is being taped off. Somewhere, another rookie is stepping into his first lot under bad lighting. Somewhere, another girl is walking home, deciding whether or not to take a shortcut. Inside the cold case unit, under humming lights and the soft whir of machines doing math with human lives, the Carter file moves half an inch closer to the edge of the desk. For the first time in more than 20 years, the story isn't just about what they didn't know back then. It's about what they might be able to see now if they're willing to follow a ghost out of state, into old records, into family trees that were never meant to intersect with murder. Cold case, they still call it. But if you listen closely, you can hear it, the sound of ice starting to crack. The genealogist sits at the corner desk that looks more like a librarian station than part of a police unit. No crime scene photos, no guns, just laptops, printouts, scrap paper covered in names and arrows. To most people, it's chaos. To her, it's a map. What you're looking at, she says, tapping a chart Novak can barely follow, is everyone who shares enough DNA with your unknown sample to show up as a blip in the system, not close family, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who wouldn't know each other if they passed on the street, but they share a great-grandparent somewhere. Novak has chased gang beefs and domestics and drug murders. She's broken up fights with her hands and with her voice. Now she's staring at a family tree that spreads across counties and states like veins under skin. It feels stranger than any alley at 3 a.m. So this guy in Indiana, she says, pointing at a bolded name, he's never even met my suspect, but their DNA is telling you they're related. Distantly, the genealogist says. Think Christmas cards, if anyone still sent those. We work backwards from him. Parents, grandparents, siblings, then sideways, aunts, uncles, cousins. Then we look at who from those branches lived, where, when. She taps a few keys. Census records slide into view, old addresses, marriage licenses, obituaries scanned crooked in tiny town newspapers, lives reduced to lines of type. Here's the cluster, she murmurs, highlighting a small knot of names. This branch moves into Illinois in the 80s. Some stay rural. One line goes urban. Chicago, South Side. That's where your world and mine start overlapping. Novak leans in. There it is. A surname repeated just enough times to matter. Reeves. Parents in Indiana. Son in Illinois. A note in a 1989 address record. Building maintenance, Chicago. Daniel Reeves, she reads. Born 1965, 26 in 1991. Male. The right age, the right geography. A job that means keys, access, hallways, lots, strangers' doors. It could still be nothing. A coincidence. A ghost conjured out of data because they want it too badly. You can't say it's him, she says. The genealogist shakes her head. I can say he sits perfectly where your unknown would sit in this family. To go further, you need your kind of evidence. My part is telling you which door to knock on first. They don't knock. Not yet. There's a rhythm to good police work. Rushing feels powerful, but it breaks cases more often than it makes them, so they start quietly. Records, databases, paper before footsteps. Old employment logs show his name next to 3 addresses over 5 years, all within a few blocks of Melissa's route home. One building stands out, 6 floors, low rent. Back entrance that opens almost directly into the alley that runs behind the warehouse. The same alley she cut through the night she died. In the original file, there's a page from a landlord interview, scrawled in Harris's cramped hand. Maintenance guy on site nights, keeps to himself, didn't see or hear anything. No name, no follow-up questions. Too many leads, not enough time. Now, 30 years later, the name comes back through a different door. Novak prints out a photo from a recent ID scan. Driver's license. The camera caught him at a DMV somewhere under fluorescent lights. Late 40s now, hair thinner, face heavier. But there's a steadiness in the eyes, not wild, not vacant, just there. The kind of face nobody remembers seeing, even when they see it every day. Does he have a record? She asked the analyst across the room. A couple of misdemeanors, comes the answer. Parking tickets. Disturbing the peace once in '99. Bar argument that didn't go anywhere, no felonies, no assaults, nothing that would get his DNA in the system. Clean, too clean, like a shirt that's been washed too many times to still look new. They watch him before they ever speak his name outside that room. By now he's working nights as a security guard at a small office park just outside the city's core. It's the kind of job that demands a uniform, a badge that doesn't carry real power, and a willingness to walk circles in the dark while everyone else sleeps. Surveillance sits in a car across from his building, engine off, windows cracked just enough to keep from fogging up. They watch him leave for his shift at the same time every evening, lunchbox in hand, shoulders slightly hunched like he's trying to make his body take up less space in the world. They watch him come back in the early hours, same route, same walk, streetlights washing his features into anonymity. He shops at a discount grocery store on Tuesdays. He buys the same things: cheap meat, bread, canned soup, coffee, a small bottle of whiskey now and then. He doesn't talk to anyone. The cashier knows him as the guard. The neighbors know him as that guy on 3. Nobody knows him well enough to offer anything more specific when they start asking around. He's quiet, one neighbor says, shrugging. Polite, another. Never had trouble with him, keeps to himself, good tenant, someone else. He creeps me out a little, but I can't say why. He just looks at you too long and then looks away fast. It's nothing, it's everything. Novak sits through hours of footage, walking, unlocking doors, smoking by a back entrance after his shift, breath clouding the air. The camera catches a habit. He wipes the filter of his cigarette with his thumb before he lights it, a small unconscious motion. Maybe superstition, maybe nothing. He's not going to give us anything easy, a younger detective mutters. Guys like this know not to spill themselves all over a scene. He didn't know about DNA in '91, Novak says. He only had his hands and his choices. That's what we're working with. The goal is simple in theory, ugly in practice. They need his DNA, not from a cheek swab he gives them voluntarily. He's not a suspect yet, not officially. They need something he's already thrown away. Something left in public, something a defense attorney can't shoot holes through later. They wait. On a drizzling Thursday evening, he stops at a fast food place on his way to work. Cheap burger, large soda, fries he eats one at a time. An undercover officer sits 3 booths away, pretending to scroll through a phone. Reeves eats slowly. He doesn't look around. He doesn't seem uneasy. That, Novak has learned, is its own kind of unease. The practiced comfortable of someone who has spent a lifetime perfecting not being noticed. When he's done, he crumples the wrapper, drops it into the trash with the cup and straw. The door chimes as he leaves. The undercover waits a beat, 2, stands, walks to the bin. He reaches in with a gloved hand, feels for the ridged side of the cup, pulls it out like he's fishing for a lost receipt. It goes into an evidence bag, sealed, labeled, logged. Chain of custody starts not with drama, but with paperwork. In the lab, the cup is swabbed at the rim where his mouth touched plastic, at the spot where his fingers pressed. The sample is loaded into the machine with the same reverence they'd give a bloodstain from a murder scene. The tech working the case knows how long it's been open. Everyone does. That knowledge hums under his movements like a second heartbeat. He double-checks everything. Triple checks. Novak doesn't hover. She knows better than to breathe down his neck. But she's there, close enough to feel the temperature of the room, close enough to hear the soft mechanical sounds of the machine doing what the original case never had access to. Hours stretch. Night presses against the high, wired windows. Phones ring in other rooms. Somewhere, someone is booking a brand new arrest. Somewhere else, another case is being born. But here, time bends around a girl who's been dead for more than 2 decades and a man who, if they're right, has been walking free for just as long. The tech appears in her doorway with a sheet of paper in his hand and a look she'll remember for the rest of her career. Not triumph, not shock, something heavier. "We got a profile," he says. "Good quality. It's him." The match, her voice is flat. It's the only way to keep it steady. Full profile match to the DNA under the victim's fingernails. Probability of a random match is... He starts to read, then stops. "It's him," he repeats. "Statistically, it's him." The numbers on the page are clinical, columns of markers lined up like teeth, crime scene profile, Reeves's profile. The alignment is almost perfect. Melissa's last act, clawing, scratching, refusing to go quietly, amounted to this, a code on a printout that anchors a ghost to a name. Novak sits back, letting the weight of it settle, pressing down on her shoulders, her chest, her throat. For a moment she sees the lot as it must have been that night. Snow, breath in the air, a man's hand closing around a young woman's throat while she tears at him with nails that break skin and bury his future under them. He leaves, thinking the dark swallowed everything. He never imagines that 30 years later, a machine will drag his name out of those microscopic fragments he thought the cold had erased. "Do we have enough?" the commander asks in the briefing room, eyes on the same sheet, a line of senior brass sitting behind him. DNA, proximity, history. "We have him living 3 blocks from the crime scene at the time," Novak says. "We have him working nights with access to every back entrance in that area. We have him as a regular at the diner she worked in. We have multiple people who remember his presence, his watching. Now we have a full DNA match from under her nails. It's as strong as cases get when you're dealing with a crime this old. There are questions, there always are, about the genetic genealogy, about whether a jury will understand it, about whether the defense will tear it apart. We don't need the genealogy for the trial, she says. We needed it to find him. The jury only needs to hear one story, her skin under his nails, his DNA under hers. The rest is background. Someone on the far side of the table exhales a long, slow sound. All right, the commander says, bring him in. But the order feels almost anticlimactic after the months of slowly tightening circles. Later, when word gets out, they'll call it an overnight break, a sudden twist, a miracle of modern science. They'll put it in a package with a neat bow. Cold case, new tech, justice. They'll make it look clean. In this room, everyone knows better. There's nothing clean about finally knowing which pair of hands stole a girl's breath and then spent decades punching time cards and unlocking doors and buying groceries like anyone else. Before the arrest teams roll out, before the cuffs close, before his name hits the news, Novak steps out into the hallway for a second. Down the corridor, the cold case board stretches across the wall, photos and names and dates staring back. Some have big red slashes through them. Solved. Some have question marks. Most have nothing at all. She walks to the center, to Melissa, the teenage face that's been staring out from old paper and newer printouts since she pulled the file from the cart. Underneath the photo, in neat black marker, is the word that's been there for decades. Unsolved. She doesn't cross it out, not yet. That would be cheap, premature. All she does is pick up the marker and write a single line beneath it. Smaller, tighter, half for the board and half for herself. Name found. Outside, morning is starting to edge into the sky, the city already warming up, trains rattling awake, people pouring into streets and buses and cars. Somewhere in a small apartment, a man with no idea that his name has finally been pulled out of the dark is packing his lunch, putting on his jacket, ready to step into another ordinary day. Somewhere else, an old woman who has spent more than half her life talking to a headstone and to unreturned voicemails stares at a silent phone, not knowing that this is the last morning it will ever be completely quiet about her daughter's case. A cold case is about to get hotter than it's been since 1991, and nobody on the outside has any idea. It's not that kind of arrest. No freeway pursuit, no shouted warnings, no sprint down an alley with gun belts slapping. It starts on a stairwell that's seen 1,000 ordinary mornings and is about to get one that isn't. 7:42 a.m. Reeves steps out of his apartment, door locking behind him with a soft, final click. Lunchbox in one hand, keys in the other, jacket zipped halfway. The hallway smells like reheated food and old paint. Downstairs, someone's radio is playing a talk show too loud. The building is half awake. He walks down the stairs, counting steps the way people do without thinking. On 2, on 3, on 4, there's a shadow at the landing. A woman in plain clothes, hands visible, stance relaxed but balanced. "Mr. Reeves?" she says. He pauses. That's the first moment right there. The microsecond where a life can still branch in two directions. He could turn around, run back up, slam the door, try to break out the fire exit. He doesn't. He shifts the lunchbox, looks at her badge. "Yeah," he says slowly. "Can I help you?" "I'm Detective Novak, Chicago Police," she says. Her voice is calm, even. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about an old case. It'd be easier to talk at the station." He frowns. That little crease between his brows deepens. "I'm supposed to be at work." "We've already notified your employer you'll be delayed," she lies smoothly. "Right now, I need you to come with us. You're not under arrest at this moment, but I am asking you strongly to cooperate." He looks past her. 2 more plain clothes at the bottom of the stairs. Another silhouette near the entrance. For a man who's spent years mastering the art of not being noticed, the sudden focus feels like a spotlight. He wets his lips. "What case?" he asks. "An incident from 1991, she says. "We'll go through the details downtown." Something flickers behind his eyes. Not surprise. Not really. More like a calculation being run quickly in the background. He nods once, slowly. "Let me grab my coat," he says. "You're wearing your coat," she replies. He looks down, as if only now noticing the zipper under his fingers. There's a second there where the hallway feels smaller, the air heavier. Then he exhales, a small surrender. "All right," he says. "Let's go." In the car, he sits in the back, not cuffed, hands on his knees. The city moves past the window in gray smears. Bus stops, storefronts, people with coffees clutched in gloved hands. He watches it all with a flat expression, as if he's just running late and this is an elaborate, inconvenient carpool. At the precinct, the interview room waits for him like a trap that's been set for 30 years. Metal table, 2 chairs, camera in the upper corner, small red light winking, walls the color of tired bone, a pitcher of water and 2 plastic cups, untouched. It could be 1991 again. It could be any year. They Mirandize him. He says he understands. He asks for a lawyer. That's his right. It doesn't slow them down. It just changes the script. His public defender arrives with a folder already growing thick, tie crooked, eyes sharp. He's seen this before. The long road from "you're just here to answer questions" to "you're facing life." They sit, the three of them, and the tape starts rolling. "State your name for the record," Novak says. "Daniel Thomas Reeves," he replies. "Date of birth?" "February 15th, 1965. "Mr. Reeves," she says, "we're reopening some unsolved homicides from the early 90s. Specifically, the 1991 murder of a young woman named Melissa Carter. Do you remember hearing about that case?" He shifts in his chair. His lawyer watches his profile like it's a bomb timer. "I remember the name," he says. "It was on the news back then. Some girl in a lot of people talking." "You lived in the neighborhood at the time," she says, sliding a photocopy of an old lease across the table, 3 blocks from the lot where she was found. "I lived a lot of places," he says. "You worked nights as building maintenance," she continues. Another page, work order slips with his name scrawled at the bottom, penned long before anyone thought about keeping handwriting samples for court. "You had keys to several properties in that area." He shrugs. "I fix things. That's what maintenance does." "You ever go into the Atlantic Diner back then?" she asks. "Probably," he says. "Everybody did. Coffee, burgers." He almost smiles. It doesn't reach his eyes. That neon sign, you couldn't miss it. "Do you remember Melissa specifically?" She pushes a photo toward him. 19, apron, smile. The picture has been reproduced so many times the edges are soft on the paper. He glances down. His jaw tightens just a twitch. "She was on the news," he says. "That's where I know her from." "Not from the diner?" she presses. "Not from seeing her night after night, serving coffee?" His lawyer clears his throat. "Detective," he says, "my client's not here to speculate on vague memories from 30 years ago. If you have something concrete, let's address that. Otherwise, we're wasting everyone's time." "Oh, we're not wasting time," she says quietly. She reaches into her folder, pulls out a document thicker than the rest, heavy with significance only she and a handful of people in this building truly understand. "Mr. Reeves," she says, sliding it across, 2 weeks ago you ate at a fast food restaurant on Halstead. You left behind a cup and a straw. Our officers collected that cup from a public trash can, obtained a DNA profile from it, and compared it to DNA recovered from under Melissa Carter's fingernails in 1991. The profiles match." He doesn't touch the paper. He doesn't have to. The word hangs in the air between them. Match. "Your DNA," she continues, "was under her fingernails, on her hands, embedded in the places she clawed at in the last seconds of her life. Can you explain that?" His lawyer picks up the report, eyes skating over markers and probabilities. He knows the math. His job now is to pretend it doesn't matter as much as everyone in the room knows it does. "We'll want our own expert to review this," he says, buying time. "Lab errors happen. Contamination. This isn't a smudge on a slide," she cuts in. "It's a full profile. It matches the partial from 91. It matches you. Statistically, the odds of it being anyone else are almost non-existent." She turns back to Reeves. "You can talk to me now or you can talk to a jury later. Either way, this piece of paper will be in the room." He stares at the table, shoulders tense under the weight of 3 decades crushing down into this fluorescent moment. "I didn't kill anyone," he says finally, voice low. "I don't know how my DNA got there." "Think," she says, leaning forward slightly. "You ever walk her home? Ever touch her? Ever grab her arm in that diner? Ever do anything that would make sense of what's on that page?" He doesn't answer. Outside the room, through the two-way glass, a row of faces watches. The commander, the lab tech, a couple of younger detectives who grew up hearing the name Carter the way people hear urban legends. For them, this is like seeing the monster finally step out from under the bed and sit in a metal chair. Inside, the lawyer leans in toward his client. "Don't say anything else," he murmurs. "We need time. We need to see everything they have." Reeves nods, not looking at him, eyes still fixed on the center of the table where the DNA report sits like a verdict waiting to be read. "Okay," the lawyer says, straightening. "Detective, my client will not be answering further questions at this time. You know his position." "I know he's going to be charged," she replies. "First-degree murder, 1 count, maybe more later. This doesn't go away because you stop talking." She clicks off the recorder. The little red light dies. The silence that follows is somehow louder. Outside the door, the paperwork starts moving at a speed cold cases don't usually get. Charging documents drafted, signatures, warrants, a judge's seal landing on the page like a stamp on history. The story leaks before the press release is even drafted. That's how this city works. Someone tells a cousin who tells a bartender who tells a blogger who tweets it before anyone can say no comment. By noon, phones across Chicago light up with the same alert. Chicago 1991 cold case solved. Arrest made in student strangling. The words hit screens, jump out of TV chyrons, spill from radio hosts' mouths. Solved, past tense, clean. It's the headline people have been waiting for so long they almost stopped believing it would ever come. In a small living room with lace curtains yellowed by time, Melissa's mother sits with the TV on, volume low out of habit. She always watches the midday news. It's one of the few rituals that's never changed. There's a mug on the coffee table, tea gone cold. The anchor's voice shifts into the tone reserved for important stories. A photo appears next to her head, Melissa at 19. It's the same shot they always use. Then it fades, replaced by a new face. An older man's booking photo, light blue background, shoulders squared, eyes not quite meeting the camera. Authorities announced today an arrest in one of Chicago's most notorious cold cases, the anchor says. The 1991 murder of 19-year-old college student and waitress, Melissa Carter. Police say new DNA technology led them to a 58-year-old security guard, Daniel Reeves, who was taken into custody this morning. The mug rattles against the wood as her mother's hand starts to shake. Tea sloshes. On screen, they show the lot as it looks now, paved, lined, full of cars. Then footage from the archive, the old snowy shot with the tape, officers in bulky coats, a younger Harris ducking under the line, a split screen of past and present. Reeves lived in the area at the time of the crime, the anchor continues. He is being held without bail. Formal charges are expected this afternoon. Police have not ruled out his possible involvement in other unsolved cases. The sound fades to a dull hum. Her heart is pounding too loud to hear the rest. The phone rings. She doesn't move. It rings again and again. On the fourth ring, she reaches for it, fingers fumbling. "Mrs. Carter?" a voice says when she answers. "This is Detective Novak. We spoke before about your daughter's case." "Yes," she manages. The word comes out thin, brittle. I saw the news. "I wanted you to hear it from me," Novak says. She's standing in the same hallway where the cold case board hangs, the same fluorescent lights bouncing off photographs and timelines. "We've made an arrest officially. His name is Daniel Reeves. We have strong evidence tying him to Melissa's murder." "Strong," her mother repeats, as if tasting the word. "Is that the same as certain?" "In our world," Novak says quietly, "it's the closest thing we get. There will be a trial, a jury. You'll have the chance to see him, to hear the case laid out." On the other end of the line, silence stretches. Then, "Is he sorry?" Novak closes her eyes for a second. She pictures the man in the interview room, hands on the table, eyes on the paper he refused to touch. "He hasn't admitted anything," she says. "Not yet." A small sound comes down the line. Not quite a sob, not laughter, something stuck in between. "You think this will make it better?" her mother asks, voice suddenly sharp, suddenly decades younger. "You think putting him in a box is going to undo what he did? Bring her back? Fix the nights I sat by the phone? Fix the way I look at every man on the bus and wonder?" "No," Novak says. "There's no point lying to the one person in this case who's never lied to anyone. It won't fix it. It might give you a different kind of night. That's all I can hope for." Her mother exhales. "Then do it," she says. "Finish it. Don't let him walk away like the others did. Don't let him outlive her in peace." In the neighborhood where Melissa once walked home, the news spreads faster than it did in 91. Back then, it was word of mouth and evening broadcasts. Now it's group chats, reposts, streaming notifications. At the diner, renovated, renamed, but still standing on the same strip of pavement, someone holds up their phone behind the counter. "Hey," the waitress calls to the cook, "look at this. They got somebody for that girl, the one from back in the day." Bum the cook, older, lines deeper, wipes his hands on a towel and squints at the screen. For a second, he sees a face that's not new. A younger version sitting at the counter, coat on, hands around a mug, eyes too still. "I'll be damned," he mutters. "That's him." "You're sure?" the waitress asks. "Sure as I am about anything anymore," he says. He looks out at the tables, at the door, at the space where a payphone used to hang. He sat right there. That night. Watched her. Walked out before she did. He swallows. The air in the diner feels thick. I should have done something. Guilt is a long fuse. Some people light it and walk away. Some carry it, burning, for years. On the evening news, they find a neighbor who remembers Reeves from 91, shoving a microphone at him on the sidewalk. He was quiet, the man says, jacket zipped up against a wind that hasn't changed in decades. Helped carry my groceries once. Fixed a leak in my sink. Never thought. You never think the monster is the one holding the toolbox. Does it scare you, the reporter asks, knowing someone like that lived right down the hall? The neighbor looks straight into the camera. It scares me that he lived there and nobody saw him for what he was, he says. If he did this. If. That little word slips in at the end, almost reflexive, the presumption of innocence drilled into everyone's vocabulary, but not always their hearts. In the old squad room, they drag out Harris's number. He's retired now, miles from the city, living in a small house that doesn't smell like coffee and gun oil. When they call and tell him, he doesn't say congratulations. He doesn't say, I knew it. He says, put me on speaker. And then, with his voice echoing off the tiles of a room he hasn't stood in for years, he tells them what they've been waiting to hear. Don't get comfortable, he says. Arrest is the easy part. Anyone can put cuffs on a man. The hard part is making sure those cuffs mean something when the trial's over, he pauses. But you did good, he adds, grudging, the words almost foreign on his tongue. You pulled her out of the freezer. Whatever happens now, at least she's not just sitting in a box waiting for someday. In the holding cell that will be his world until arraignment, Daniel Reeves sits on a narrow bench, back against the wall. The fluorescent light buzzes. The air smells like disinfectant and nervous sweat. A guard walks past. Another inmate mutters something from a nearby cell, already tuned into the grapevine. Hey, a voice calls. You the guy from the news? The old case? Reeves doesn't answer. He stares at his hands instead, the same hands that turned wrenches and signed time cards and locked doors. The same hands that, according to science and a dead girl's fingernails, closed around a throat on a winter night in 1991 and didn't let go. Outside, the city tells itself that something huge has just ended. It doesn't know yet that what's actually started is longer, slower, uglier. Motions and hearings and experts and arguments. Stories inside stories. Questions inside supposed answers. On paper, for the first time, the case has a name in the slot labeled defendant. In living rooms and kitchens, in bars and buses, people repeat that name like it's an incantation that might finally put a ghost to bed. In one small apartment with a room kept exactly as it was in 1991, a mother sits on the edge of a made bed and whispers her daughter's name instead. Out in the evidence room, under buzzing lights, the box labeled Carter, Melissa, 1991, sits on a cart, not a shelf. Open, active, its contents spread across desks, photos pinned under magnets, reports clipped, notes added in fresh ink. Cold case, the label still says. But if you put your hand on the cardboard now, you can feel it. Not ice, heat. Trials don't start with all rise. They start months earlier, in rooms without cameras, with motions and paper cuts and arguments over what the jury will be allowed to see and what the system will pretend doesn't exist. By the time the calendar hits the first hearing in People versus Daniel Reeves, the phrase Chicago 1991 cold case solved has been said so many times it started to sound like a jingle. The city has moved it into the same mental drawer as justice served, even though nothing has actually been decided. In a bland courtroom with buzzing lights and hard benches, the first real battle isn't about what he did. It's about whether they're allowed to prove it. Reeves is brought in wearing county beige instead of orange today, hair flattened where the pillow pressed it, wrists cuffed in front. He sits at the defense table, looking smaller than he did in his booking photo, like the room itself is pressing in on him. His lawyer, Strauss, has the look of a man who's been fighting gravity for a long time and learned to pick his hills. At the other table, the assistant state's attorney, Keller, stacks her files in a neat, deliberate pile. She's younger than the case. That's the thing about cold cases. The people arguing over them weren't even shaving when the body hit the ground. On the motion to suppress DNA evidence, the judge says, glasses low on his nose as he glances from one table to the other. I've read your briefs. I've reviewed the case law. Counsel, I'll hear argument. Strauss stands. He smooths his tie, more habit than vanity. Your Honor, the state wants to bring in DNA obtained through a deeply flawed chain. We are talking about genetic genealogy based on distant relatives who never consented to have their bloodlines used in a criminal dragnet, then a so-called abandoned cup pulled from a trash can tested without warrant. This is not the precise science the state wants to sell. This is guesswork dressed up in lab coats. He paces a slow few steps. My client's genetic privacy has been violated via relatives who never agreed to be part of an investigation. He never gave them his DNA voluntarily. And the match they brag about exists because the state piggybacked on those databases in ways the public never anticipated. It's a constitutional overreach, Your Honor. You let this in, you're saying anyone whose cousin got curious about their family tree is one bad lab tech away from being dragged into court. Keller doesn't roll her eyes, but only because she's practiced. She stands when it's her turn, hands resting lightly on the podium. Your Honor, the defense is trying to put the genealogy process on trial because it doesn't like where it pointed, she says. The genealogical work was an investigative lead, nothing more. It gave detectives a name to look at. The evidence we're actually seeking to admit is not from a family tree website. It's from the defendant's own DNA left on a cup he discarded in a public trash can. No expectation of privacy, no coercion, no trick. She flips a page. The profile from that cup was compared to a preserved sample taken from under the victim's fingernails in 1991. The match is clear. The probability of a random match is astronomically low. The science is not speculative, Your Honor. This is the same type of DNA analysis used in hundreds of prosecutions. The circumstances here are stronger than most. The DNA was in the exact place we'd expect it to be if the defendant strangled her while she fought for her life. She lets that hang for a heartbeat. The defense wants you to focus on the genealogy because it's complicated and sounds scary. But the jury will never be asked to convict based on third cousins or family trees. They'll be asked to weigh one simple fact, his DNA under her nails. That's it. The judge takes his time. He removes his glasses, polishes them with a cloth. He's older than both attorneys. Old enough to remember when DNA was a novelty, not a daily occurrence on his docket. He's watched the law bend itself into knots around technology it didn't see coming. In this court, he says finally, investigative techniques are not on trial unless they violate constitutional protections. The genealogy work pointed to the defendant but did not compel him to do anything. The DNA actually before the court came from items discarded in public. There is ample case law supporting the collection and testing of abandoned property. Strauss's jaw tightens. The motion to suppress is denied, the judge concludes. The DNA evidence will be admissible. The genealogy process will be limited at trial to what's necessary to explain how the defendant became a suspect. The jury will hear the science. If either of you thinks they can't handle it, you're in the wrong business. The gavel doesn't slam. It just taps. Quiet. Final. At the back of the courtroom, Novak exhales slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until then. Beside her, Harris sits stiff in an old suit, his retirement belly pushing against the buttons. He insisted on coming. If we're finally going to swing at this thing, he'd said, I want to be in the room when it lands. Step 1, he murmurs now. Don't celebrate yet. I'm not the celebrating type, she says. He gives her a sideways look. Everybody's the celebrating type. They just lie about it. Outside, the courthouse steps are clogged with cameras. Reporters stand between portable lights and tripods, practicing lines while their camera people adjust focus. Today, a judge cleared the way for prosecutors to use crucial DNA evidence in the decades-old murder of 19-year-old Melissa Carter. The words are carefully chosen. Crucial. Decades old. Cleared the way. The city eats them up on lunch breaks and couch cushions, nodding along, feeling like they're watching justice assemble itself like a puzzle. Jury selection takes weeks. No one wants people who already convicted him off the notification on their phones. No one wants people who think DNA is either infallible or witchcraft. They sit them in rows, ask them questions, watch their eyes. How do you feel about forensic science? It's cool, a young guy in a hoodie says, then winces. I mean, I watch those shows. It always solves everything. Real life is slower, Keller says, but science is still science. What about the fact that this case is from 1991? Strauss asks another potential juror, an older woman with tired hands. Do you believe justice delayed is justice denied? I believe they should have caught him sooner, she says bluntly. But I also believe better late than never. He marks something on his pad. He doesn't want her. Too eager. Too clean. They excuse people for knowing too much, for knowing too little, for having daughters the same age Melissa would be now, for having sons who look too much like the man at the defense table. In the end, 12 and 2 alternates are sworn in. Teachers, an IT guy, a bus driver, a retired nurse, a grocery manager. A cross-section of the city that's supposed to stand for all of it. Trial day 1. This time, all rise echoes off wood and stone. The room is different now, fuller. The first 2 rows behind the prosecution's table are filled with family and supporters. Melissa's mother, a cousin, her old classmate with the thick glasses, older now, lines softening into the corners of her face. On the defense side, there's no crowd, just one middle-aged woman who might be Reeves's sister, or maybe just someone who believes innocence should be a default, not an exception. Keller stands to deliver her opening. The jurors face her, notebooks open, pens held like weapons that only record. On a cold night in December 1991, she begins. A 19-year-old girl finished her shift at a diner and started walking home. She didn't make it. Her name was Melissa Carter. She doesn't point at the photos yet. She doesn't need to. The name is enough. For more than 20 years, this case sat without an arrest, she continues. Not because the detectives didn't care, and not because Melissa's life didn't matter, but because the technology of the time couldn't turn the evidence she left behind into a name. That changed. What didn't change is what happened that night. She paints the picture in careful strokes, using everything they can prove: the walk, the lot, the struggle, the DNA under her nails, Reeves living and working in the exact area, his presence in the diner, his quiet watching that more than one witness remembers. You will hear from experts, she says. They will explain how DNA works. They will explain what it means when someone's profile is recovered from under a victim's fingernails in a strangulation case. You will hear from people who saw him in her orbit, people who, at the time, didn't know they were looking at the man who had already decided to kill her. She finally turns to the defense table. The evidence will show that the defendant, Daniel Reeves, followed Melissa that night, that he attacked her, that she fought, clawing at him desperately, pulling his skin under her nails. The evidence will show that he strangled her, left her in that lot, and walked away. And the evidence will show that he then lived the next 20-plus years as if nothing had happened. She steps back, voice steady. At the end of this trial, we will ask you to do what time, technology, and tenacity have finally allowed us to do. Hold him accountable. Not for all the wrongs in the world, just for one, for what he did to Melissa Carter. She sits. Silence follows, thick enough to feel. Strauss stands slowly, buttoning his jacket. He knows he can't charm this jury away from a dead girl. He doesn't try. He aims for something else. Doubt's quiet, persistent cousin. Good morning, he says. We're here today because something terrible happened in 1991. On that, everyone agrees. A young woman was murdered. That is a tragedy. It has always been a tragedy. Nobody is here to argue otherwise. He paces, hands clasped loosely behind his back. But tragedy alone doesn't make someone guilty, he continues. Nor does the passage of time, nor does a city's hunger for resolution. You are not here to heal wounds. You are here to decide whether the state has proven, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the man sitting there, he nods toward Reeves, is the one who committed that crime. He picks up the DNA report, holds it up like a prop he respects but doesn't fear. You are going to hear a lot about this, he says. About markers and probabilities and profiles. The state will tell you that science connects Mr. Reeves to this crime. What they won't tell you, at least not loudly, is that science alone cannot tell you how, when, or why any DNA got anywhere. It doesn't show you a video. It doesn't read minds. It just says, this genetic material matches this person, and that's it. He looks at the jurors one by one. They will not be able to tell you that my client ever met Melissa. They will not show you a witness who saw them together that night. They will not produce a confession, a weapon, a fingerprint on anything. They will not show you that he had any history of violence, any pattern of predation, any reason to target this young woman. What they will show you is that he lived near a place she walked, went to a diner where she worked, and that his DNA is somewhere the state wants you to believe it could only be if he's a murderer. He sets the report gently on the table, lets his voice soften, almost conspiratorial. But you live in the real world, he says. You know how messy it is. You know how people bump into each other, brush hands, share objects. You know that we leave bits of ourselves everywhere we go. You're going to hear that DNA can transfer indirectly, that it can persist, that if two people move through the same spaces, trace amounts can show up in unexpected places. You're going to hear that the sample from 1991 was partial, degraded, and handled with techniques that would be considered primitive now. He nods toward the prosecution table. They're asking you to take that old, fragile sample and connect it to one person in a city of millions, to say there is no other reasonable explanation than murder. And they're asking you to do it without answering basic questions. Why this girl? Why that night? Why no other evidence? Why no confession, not even after he's told the odds are against him? He lets the last question hang, not because he expects an answer, but because he wants why in their heads. When all of this is over, he finishes, you may still believe something terrible happened to Melissa that we can't fully explain. You may still feel anger, grief, the weight of the years, but you will be bound, by law and by conscience, to acquit if the doubts remain. Cold case solved makes a good headline. It doesn't make a verdict. Only you do. He sits. Reeves doesn't look at him. He doesn't look at anyone. From the gallery, Novak watches the jurors. Watches which ones meet Strauss's eyes and which ones flinch at certain words. She's not a lawyer. She doesn't think in objections and precedents, but she understands stories. She can feel how both sides are trying to reframe the same night into two different realities. Beside her, Melissa's mother stares at Reeves like if she looks hard enough, she can force the truth out of his skin. "Do you think they believe him?" she whispers. Novak hesitates. "I think they're listening," she says. "That's their job." "What's yours?" the older woman asks, eyes never leaving the defendant. "Mine," Novak says quietly. "Mine was getting him into that chair. After that," she trails off. "After that, it's out of her hands. Out of Harris's, out of Melissa's, which once clawed hard enough to pull DNA out of a stranger's flesh." As witness after witness takes the stand in the days that follow, the story fills in like a picture emerging in a darkroom tray. The old cook from the diner, hair thinner, voice rougher. He recounts the weird call, the man at the counter, the way Melissa wrote strange caller on a napkin that vanished into a trash bag. The former waitress, now a mother of two, clutching a tissue as she talks. "She told me that guy made her uncomfortable," she says, nodding toward the defense table without actually looking at it. "Said he watched her too closely. I told her to ignore it. We always say that, just ignore it. I didn't think..." The neighbor from the building near the lot, the couple who heard the argument and the thud, their guilt 30 years old and still raw at the edges. "We should have looked out the window," the woman says, voice cracking. "I should have done something." And the experts. The lab tech who retested the old sample, the geneticist who explains transfer and degradation and why the particular pattern they found under Melissa's nails is consistent with direct, violent contact, not a casual brush or handshake. Under cross, they admit the limits. Nothing is 100%. There is always a number, however small, that says, maybe someone else. Strauss circles those numbers like a shark around a drop of blood. But the thing that gnaws at Novak as she sits through each long day isn't in the testimony. It's in what they don't have. The key is still a question mark in a plastic bag. The anonymous 3:17 a.m. caller is still a ghost. The why is still a black hole at the center of every diagram she's ever drawn. One night after court, she's alone in the cold case office, the building almost empty, the city outside the windows reduced to scattered lights and siren echoes. The Carter board is in front of her. Photos, timelines, arrows. Her eyes land on the payphone location from the original report. A corner near a convenience store and a bar that changed names 3 times since '91. It's a minor point in the trial. The prosecutors don't need it. They've got DNA. They've got proximity. Legally, they don't care who made that call. She does, because if it was Reeves, it means something. And if it wasn't Reeves, it might mean something worse. She picks up her coat. Even with a suspect locked in a cell and a jury in place, there are still parts of this story that haven't been told. And stories like this, the ones that crawl out of cold years into the light, have a habit of saving their ugliest chapters for last. The corner where the payphone used to be doesn't look like a place where anything important ever happened. That's the trick the city plays. It sands things down, repaints, rebrands, pretends. The phone is gone, of course. Payphones are fossils now. In its place, a steel post with a small metal scar where wires used to snake into brick. The convenience store is still there, but with a new name, brighter signs, brighter promises. The bar on the corner has changed faces 3 times, neon swapped for LED, smoke for craft beer menus. Novak stands on the sidewalk, hands in pockets, collar up against a wind that smells like car exhaust and fried food. She closes her eyes for a second and tries to hear it the way it was at 3:17 a.m. in 1991. Dark, colder. Fewer cars. A man walks up to a phone, pushes coins into a slot, dials with fingers that might be shaking or steady. There's a body in the lot off 43rd behind the old warehouse. Then silence. Then a hang-up. She opens her eyes. The scene snaps back. Traffic, voices. A bus hisses at the curb, doors opening, closing. Inside the store, the air is warm, thick with candy and detergent and old coffee. A bored teenager behind the counter taps at his phone with one thumb, barely looking up when she walks in. "We used to have a payphone outside," he says automatically when she flashes her badge. "There's a plaque in the back." "I'm not here about vandalism," she says. "I'm here about history." He blinks. "History? Who's the oldest person working here?" she asks. "Owner, manager, anyone who remembers this place when people still carried change." He points toward the back. "Mr. Ortiz," he says. "Office. Door with the employees only sign that doesn't mean anything." Ortiz is the kind of man who looks like he's been 60 for 20 years. Gray at the temples, lines cut deep around his mouth, shoulders still square. When she explains why she's there, he sinks into his chair slowly, as if someone added 10 pounds to his chest. "That girl," he says, rubbing a hand over his face. "I know that case. I was here back then, stocking shelves, running the register." "Do you remember the payphone?" she asks. "Sure," he says. "It was out front, against the wall, right next to the cigarette machine. People used it all night. Drunks, cabbies, guys calling their wives to say they were running late." He gives a humorless half smile that dies fast. Lot of voices. Do you remember the night the cops came asking about a call, she says. 3:17 in the morning, anonymous male voice, reported a body. He leans back, eyes going distant, searching. I remember cops, he murmurs. 2 uniforms came in, asked who'd been working. That was me. They asked if I'd seen anyone using the phone around 3. I said no. We were slow that night. I'd gone in the back to do inventory. I told them I heard it ring once. Thought about answering, but by the time I came out it was dead. His fingers tapped the desk, mimicking the sound. They asked if we had cameras. We didn't back then, just a mirror. You didn't see anyone, hear anything, she presses. Not that I can swear to, he says. Look, that corner always had guys hanging around. Hustlers, dealers, you know the type. One of them could have made the call, or the guy who did it, or some poor bastard who stumbled across the scene and wanted it off his conscience but not on his record. Did you ever hear anyone talk about it after, she asks. Brag, hint, say they called it in? He hesitates. His eyes shift toward the store, the door, the street. This is a long time ago, he says. People talk. You don't always listen close enough. You regret that later. Try, she says softly. He sighs, rubs his thumb along the edge of a stapler. There was a guy, he says. Name was Ray. We called him Rail, 'cause he was skinny as one. Hung around outside a lot. Sold little baggies of whatever people wanted. He'd come in to use the phone sometimes, thought it made him look legitimate. He snorts. One night after the murder, I remember him saying something like, I did my civic duty, I made the call. I figured he was talking out of his ass. Ray liked to put himself in the center of any story. What happened to him, she asks. Dead, Ortiz says. Overdose, mid-90s, couple years after. He shrugs. Or maybe it was someone else. Memories get weird. Anybody else mention it, she says. Not that stuck, he replies. Look, detective, you know how it is. In neighborhoods like this, people see more than they say. They hear more than they admit. A voice on a phone is just a voice until it's too late. She thanks him, leaves a card, steps back out into the wash of noise. The bar next door has its lights off. It'll open in an hour. The bartender from 91 is probably long gone. Dead, moved, retired. Memory's a shallow well in places like this. You draw water, sometimes you get mud. She stands where the phone used to be, one palm pressed against cold brick. She imagines a man standing exactly there, back hunched against the winter wind, coins in his hand. Did he look around? Did his heart race? Did he care at all? If it was Reeves, it means he left her there and then decided, for some twisted reason, to make sure she was found. Guilt, control, fear. There's a story in that. But the timing, the location, the little pieces of neighborhood talk that survived all point just as easily to someone else stumbling through the dark, seeing something they didn't want to see. Maybe Rail, maybe some other ghost. Does it matter, legally? No. Does it matter to her? Too much. Back at the courthouse, the trial grinds on. The state calls the genetic genealogist, not by choice, but because Strauss insists on pulling the whole process into the open. If they're going to hang his client on that chain of events, he wants every link examined. She takes the stand with a stack of charts and calm eyes, explains databases, centimorgans, family trees. The jurors nod along, some lost, some fascinated. So you built a family tree, Strauss says on cross. And at the end of that tree, you found my client, correct? I found a cluster of relatives, she replies. Mr. Reeves was one of several people who fit the profile. The DNA alone didn't tell me this man is the killer. It told me people related to this man are genetically close to the unknown. Law enforcement used that lead to investigate him. Investigate him until they liked him for it, Strauss says. Investigate him until his own DNA matched the crime scene sample, she corrects. My work was a map. Their work placed him at the destination. He doesn't like that answer. But he moves on. Doubt doesn't need to win every exchange. It just needs to plant seeds. In one corner of the courtroom, Novak watches the jurors' pens. When Keller's witnesses talk about the fight, the fingernails, the struggle, the pens move, scribbling furiously. When Strauss brings up probabilities and indirect transfer, the pens slow, tap, hesitate. You can't read a verdict in ink, but you can feel the tug of war. Midweek, they call Melissa's mother. She walks to the stand slowly, wearing her best dress, one that still doesn't look like it was made for courtrooms. She's smaller than the woman in the 91 clips, but the shape of her anger hasn't changed. It's just quieter now, denser. Keller is gentle with her. You have to be. The jury has seen photos of her younger, rawer grief. They're seeing the aftermath now, the long burn. Mrs. Carter, Keller says, can you tell the jury what kind of person your daughter was? She does. She talks about the books, the notebooks, the clippings on the fridge, about the way Melissa talked to people, always asking follow-up questions, always writing things down. She wanted to tell stories, her mother says, voice steady until it isn't. She wanted to make the city listen to people it didn't care about. She thought if you just told the truth loud enough, someone would have to hear it. Keller lets the silence that follows sit heavy, then moves on gently. When did you last see her? She kissed me on the cheek, the older woman says, said she was late, said she'd be back after her shift, asked if I wanted her to bring leftovers. I told her no, I'd be asleep. I lied. I'm always awake till she comes home. She stares past Keller, past the jury. That night, I stayed awake anyway. There's a tremor in the room now, something like a held breath. Did you know the defendant before this case? Keller asks. No, she says. I saw his face for the first time on the news, then again today. Her eyes slide, finally, to the defense table. They land on Reeves, who shifts in his seat like he's been pinned. Is there anything you want to say to him? Keller asks. It's not a legal question. It's a human one. Strauss starts to object, then doesn't. The judge lets it ride. Mrs. Carter looks at him, really looks. I have waited 32 years, she says, for somebody to look me in the eye and say what they did to my daughter. I don't know if it was you. They tell me it was. They show me numbers and charts and maps. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. But I know this. Her voice sharpens. Whoever did it has had 32 Christmases, 32 birthdays, 32 years of mournings. My daughter got one night in that lot. She leans slightly forward in the witness chair. I hope, she says quietly, that if it was you, if you did that to her, you see her face every time you close your eyes, and I hope when this is over you have to see mine too. She steps down. The courtroom is silent except for the bailiff's low-practiced instructions. In the hallway afterward, reporters swarm, but she doesn't stop. She doesn't need cameras anymore. She's been performing grief for other people for too long. Now it's hers again. That night, Novak goes back to the board. The payphone corner is still circled. The key is still bagged. Reeves is still on the defense table instead of the offender list. She takes a marker and draws a line from the anonymous caller's location to the lot. It's not evidence. It's not even a lead. It's just a line that has been bothering her for years. If the caller wasn't Reeves, then someone else was in that lot between the moment of the murder and the moment the patrol car rolled in. Someone else stepped into that darkness, saw her there, and made a choice she'll never fully understand. Help, but only at arm's length. Fear? Sure. Survival. No one in that neighborhood in 1991 was eager to stand around waiting for a patrol car to pull up and start asking questions. Calling from 8 blocks away was self-preservation. But it's also something else. It's proof that the city isn't just a mass of people looking the other way. Somebody didn't. Somebody saw and couldn't walk past. She wonders briefly if that person's still alive, if they've ever told anyone, if they've spent years watching coverage of the Carter case with a secret stuck halfway between guilt and relief. In another part of town, in a house too small to hold all the ghosts that live in it, a man in his 50s stares at the trial coverage with the volume off. His hair is thinner now. His eyes are filmed with the kind of exhaustion that's more chemical than emotional. He remembers that night, the alley, the lot, the way his high wore off in an instant when he saw the shape on the ground, the way his heart hammered so hard he thought it might drop him right there next to her. He remembers running, hands shaking as he fed coins into the phone, voice steady out of sheer instinct. There's a body in the lot off 43rd behind the old warehouse. Hanging up before his own name could slip out. He remembers wondering for years if not giving it made him a coward or just smart enough to survive. He never told anyone, not really. Bragged once, half drunk, to a clerk who probably didn't believe him. Said, I did my civic duty, felt big for half a second, felt small for the rest of the night. He could call now, tell them, say, that was me, I saw her. Would it change anything? Would it put another piece in a puzzle that already has a face attached, or would it just rip his own life open for strangers to poke at? He turns the TV off, the room goes quiet. In the courthouse, the state rests. The defense begins. They don't call Reeves. Strauss isn't reckless. Putting him on the stand would be like handing the prosecution a loaded gun and hoping they forget how to aim. Instead, they call their own expert, a DNA skeptic with good credentials and a practiced air of reasonable concern. He doesn't say the match is wrong. He says the world is complicated. Yes, his DNA matches the profile from under her nails, he concedes. But we have to look at how that DNA might have gotten there. Was the sample pristine? No. Was it collected with today's safeguards? No. Has it been stored perfectly for 32 years? We hope so, but we can't be certain. Could trace amounts have transferred from an object they both touched? Could there have been secondary transfer from another person? These are not fantasies. These are known phenomena. Keller cross-examines him step by methodical step. Is it possible, she says, that all of that happened exactly in the way it would need to put his DNA specifically under the victim's fingernails in a pattern consistent with a struggle? He hesitates. The pause is everything. Possible, he says? Very unlikely. But my role is to talk about what science allows, not to tell you what happened in a lot I've never seen. Is the most likely explanation, she presses, that the person whose DNA is under her nails is the person she fought with before she died? He exhales. Yes, he says, that's the most likely explanation. Science gives us likelihoods, not certainties. The jury hears the first part louder than the second. Most likely, not certain. The two phrases collide in their heads, sparks landing on whatever biases they walked in with. When both sides rest, The judge gives them instructions about reasonable doubt, about evidence versus emotion, about sympathy and what they're allowed to do with it. Then the case leaves everyone who's lived with it for years and lands in the hands of 12 people who met it a few weeks ago. Deliberations begin. In the hallway, reporters camp out like they're waiting for a storm to hit. Twitter arguments ignite. Talk radio hosts rant about science on trial and long-delayed justice. Pundits who weren't old enough to walk in 91 talk like they've lived on that block forever. In the cold case unit, it's strangely quiet. Novak sits at her desk, staring at the file. Harris sits across from her, hat in his hands. "You think they'll convict?" he asks. "I think they have enough to," she says. "I think they have enough not to." She shrugs, a small, helpless motion she hates. Juries are another universe. He nods slowly. "If they don't," he says, "we did our job anyway. We followed it as far as it could go." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" she asks. "No," he says. "It's supposed to make you sleep a little." He looks at Melissa's photo. Some cases end with a verdict. Some just end with less not knowing than before. Either way, they end. That counts for something. In her apartment, Melissa's mother doesn't move from the couch all afternoon. The TV is on, volume low, the station looping trial recaps and live shots of an unremarkable courthouse door. She watches the door like something is going to walk out of it other than a verdict. Like maybe, somehow, her daughter will. In his cell, Reeves lies on his back, staring at the underside of the bunk above him. He counts the rust spots. They don't form patterns. His lawyer told him they have a shot. "There's doubt," Strauss said. "I gave them doubt." Reeves isn't sure if he believes him. He isn't sure what he believes about himself anymore. After weeks of hearing his own life narrated back to him with every worst-case assumption attached. Outside, the city slips toward evening. Lights blink on. Commuters crowd trains. Somewhere, another 19-year-old is walking home from a shift, deciding whether the bus is worth the wait. In the jury room, 12 people sit around a scarred wooden table, files and notes spread out. Melissa's photo at the center. They go over everything: the DNA, the diner, the maintenance job, the gap of years, the missing why. Some say it has to be him. Some say it's probably him, but it's probably enough. They argue, they circle, they vote again. Hours pass. When the word finally comes, we have a verdict, and it travels down hallways and across broadcasts like a current. People straighten, cameras swing toward the door. The courtroom fills again. Everyone stands as the jury files in, faces carefully neutral. In the second row, Novak feels her heart pick up in a way sirens never managed to do. Beside her, Harris stares straight ahead, jaw clenched. On the other side of the aisle, Strauss leans toward Reeves and murmurs something that could be reassurance or surrender. Reeves nods once, slowly. The judge looks at the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" he asks. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson says. He holds a folded piece of paper in his hand. For a moment, that paper holds 32 years of grief, anger, work, and doubt. The clerk steps forward, takes it, opens it. In that breath before she reads, before the word guilty or not hits the air, the entire city hangs in a kind of suspended animation. This is the moment people mean when they say, "cold case solved." This is the frame they freeze when they talk about justice arriving late. But whatever word comes next, whatever sound fills this room, it won't erase the lot or the phone or the key or the man who might have called in the body and then walked away. It won't untangle the parts of the story that never made it into evidence. It won't refill the decades. It will just be a word. A heavy one, a loud one, the kind that echoes, the kind that keeps echoing long after the cameras cut away.